I believe that Senator Hewitt would like to take personal privilege, and we'd like to give her that opportunity right now.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. Members, some of you were in the House chamber earlier, but I just wanted to take a moment to introduce Senator-elect Caleb Klein-Peter. He has recently been elected to represent Senate District 17, and so we're looking forward to working with him. I think he'll be sworn in around the end of the month. And so you'll get to see him quite a bit going forward. So welcome to the Capitol. We're really excited to work with you.
Congratulations. We also have joining us today some of our other colleagues. We have Senator Fessy sitting there to our far right. And we have also Representative Adams sitting to my left. So we thank these two gentlemen for joining us today. We have two agenda items, and we're going to start with the Office of Juvenile Justice. And so if you would please introduce yourself. We stated at our last hearing with you guys, which was back in August, that we would have you come back and give us an update, and that is what we are expecting to receive today, in addition to more questions that my colleagues may have. Oh, is he not? Are you on?
Yes, Ceci. Yes, thank you, Senator Barrow. Curtis Nelson with the Office of Juvenile Justice, Assistant Secretary, and I also have with me Mr. Darren Potan, who will introduce them.
Yes, Darren Potan, Executive Management Advisor.
And so, Senator, Deputy Secretary Summers, he had a family emergency, and so I am here in his place. So.
Okay. So can you provide us with an update and give us, let us know exactly where you guys are? When you were here the last time, we were having some issues with some of the facilities, young folks breaking out, etc. And then the plan, some of the legislation that had passed as it relates to a tiered level. Where are we with many of these items?
So, Senator, what we have done is prepared a presentation, and we've prepared that to you all. That was based upon your questions that were submitted, so we kind of just summarize our responses to those questions. And so where we are, populations-wise, as of November 17th, the majority of the youth that we supervise are on what we call community-based supervision. That's about 2,000 youth that we supervise in the community. In the secure care facilities, we have about 267 youth. And in our non-secure group home settings, we have about 345 youth. There was a letter that we sent out to judges, and that letter made a lot of news, and we didn't really understand why there was such concern about the letter, because we regularly communicate with our judges to let them know we have youth in detention who need to be placed, and we're rotating youth out of our custody so that we can make room. And so that letter really was more just to say, if you get a bunch of motions asking for release of youth, don't be alarmed, but we want to kind of make space for the children who need to be placed in our custody. Right now, statewide, I have about 50 youth who need to be placed. Of that 50, 30 would be placed in a group home setting, and the other 20 plus would be placed in a secure setting. If you look at
before
Yes,
you go from that page, we have a question from Senator Mizell.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could you tell me on the population, the breakdown between male and female?
So the males still tend to be the majority of our youth in care. Senator, what I would say is in secure population, that's probably going to be about less than 20% represent females. The majority are males.
And are they primarily all at where? Are they kind of scattered or?
No, ma'am, that's a good question. So yes, ma'am, the majority of the youth female population in our custody, they are at where. So I have 11 girls who are in a secure care facility at where. I have another 6 who are in the residential program. And then I have about 4 to 5 who are off the wear grounds at the Johnny Gray Jones residential facility, but that is still a facility that is operated by Ware.
Okay, so they're all under the facility at Ware in some form or another.
Yes, ma'am, that's
Okay,
correct.
okay.
That's correct. And we do have, fortunately, the girl population is small, and I'm thankful for that. I do have some girls. I think I have 4 in a group home in New Orleans, and there's one more that may have about 2 to 3. So, but Ware does oversee the majority of our female population.
And I'm going to want to get more into that, but just as you're taking us through your information, I just want to understand before you share it with us, every facility is under the guidance of juvenile justice, whether it's a privately owned or funded by whatever,
Yes.
but you all are you all set the tone, you all set the standards. Am I right?
So with the providers, we have a contract, and so
Okay.
our oversight is through those contracts, and we monitor those contracts.
Okay.
Versus the facilities that the state own, yes, I have direct oversight
Okay.
with those.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mizell, Madam Pro Tem. Before we go any further, and I'm going to try to see if I can get this letter to all of you guys, because if the presentation is based upon my letter, then I want to make sure that my colleagues have that information. I did send a letter back to the secretary back in July. And I had 12 questions that I asked them to answer. And so it's my understanding that the 12 questions are being answered in this presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, Dan. I want to make sure that I give that to my colleagues so that they can follow along as well. So I'm going to get someone to get that information for me. But, okay, thank you. You may proceed.
And if for some reason, Senator Barrow, once we finish, if you feel like we still need to give a little bit more, we definitely want to make sure we answer those questions thoroughly. So the next slide we would have, it's average length of stay. And that was something else that we highlighted in our letter to our juvenile court judges, is that the average length of stay has not had much change. A youth once placed in our custody on average will stay in state's custody for right about 1 year. And so we're monitoring that because we always want to ensure that the young people are only with us as long as they need to be. If you look at the next slide, quarterly admissions. So we have seen an increase on a quarterly basis. So quarterly for the for custody placements, we're right at about 89 for this fourth quarter. On supervision in the field, you will notice that there has been an increase. So for the fourth quarter, we have about 559 youth who have come into the system to fall under our supervision. The next slide, which is the Office of Juvenile Justice Future State. So this shows where all the facilities are placed within our state. And I would like to kind of take a little time with this one. So Columbia, Swanson, that is the fast track program, and that is a tier 2, tier 3 program. And currently we have 48 youth. We are at capacity with the Columbia facility. Acadiana Bunkie, that is a 72-bed facility, and that is, again, a tier 2, tier 3 facility. At Acadiana, we've placed a lot of focus on making sure the young people are receiving what they need for college preparation as well as vocational programming. If you drop down to the red box, Acadiana St. Martinville, that is a tier 1 facility, and we also use the St. Martin facility for our in-processing of youth. So when a child leaves a detention center, we want to have somewhere where we can do some assessments before we actually place them in a secure facility. And so St. Martin is the facility that we're currently using for that purpose. And it can house up to 24 youth. If you go back down to the right, Bridge City. So Bridge City, there were major changes that we made to Bridge City. And as Senator Barrow mentioned, last time we were here, we were addressing issues of escape. So Bridge City was depopulated, and the only youth on that campus are the youth who have been charged and adjudicated for a sex-related offense. And so the program is the JUMP program. That stands for Juvenile Understanding and Managing Problematic Behavior. And so currently we have 24 youth at Bridge City. We could probably house at least 40 youth, but again, that is only for children who have been adjudicated for a sex-related offense. And the goal is to keep it that way. The young people there, their behavior is not typical of wanting to escape or engage in violent behavior. And so we feel that with the security measures that were put in place statewide, Bridge City is definitely a much safer facility as it stands today. So going back up north, we're going to go to West Feliciana. Now, West Feliciana, yes.
So before you go any further, we have a question from Senator Jackson.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Bridge City, how is that facility? Is it dormitory or is it single room?
It is an open dormitory.
Okay, so you always know my concern with open dormitories, moving from one in Swanson, and not saying that these juveniles will reoffend, but there's been a lot of publicity regarding rape in juvenile facilities. If we're housing all of those sex offenders, that juvenile sex offenders in an open dormitory style facility, how are we protecting them from
Yes,
each
ma'am.
other's for sexual crimes?
That is a good question. And so keep in mind, before we depopulated Bridge City, it was always the sex offender campus.
Well, I understand that, but
Yes, ma'am.
the question has recently arose that, or reports have recently arose that there's a lot of sexual abuse and rape going on in the juvenile facilities.
So I want to distinguish ourselves from where, which I know Senator Mizell, you asked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So at Bridge City, we are PREA compliant. So we have sufficient staff that's in the dorms with the youth when they are in the dormitories. So at night when they're sleeping, when they're doing their hygiene, we have the staffing level to work those dorms to ensure that we're in compliance with PREA law.
Okay, so you know what I'm going to ask you then. At Swanson, we're still not fully staffed enough. We're pulling probation officers and everyone else to try to staff those dorms. There was a juvenile to staff ratio that was alarming.
Yes.
My understanding was that was all across Louisiana. In these dormitory style buildings, we had one female in with 8 to 9 youth in dormitory styles. What is it looking like in this facility?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect question, Senator. So what happened when we took the general population youth off that campus, the staff that would work with that population, we were able to just shift them over. And so now for Bridge City, we have sufficient staff numbers to work that campus. And the goal is to keep it around 42, 50.
So how many juveniles are in dorms? Like per dorm, how many juveniles kind of?
So for each dorm, it's up to 12 youth per dorm. And so we have 3 dorms. We're not at capacity.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So how many on the night shift in that dorm, and in each dorm, how many adults are there? How many staffers?
I have 2 staffers per dorm at night in the dorm, but I also have at least 4 to 6 more staff who are roving the campus and doing other duties.
And how do juveniles report if there is sexual abuse or rape? How would they go about reporting it?
So we have an administrative relief procedure, and so the youth can file a complaint. They can also, all of these children have attorneys, so they can notify their attorney. I have caseworkers who work on that campus. They can report it to the caseworker. For each one of the dorms, we have clearly up and published, if you have a problem, this is what you would do. These young people, they go to court on a regular basis. And so we feel for our campus, PREA compliance is not really an issue.
Yeah. How many reports have you had, let's say, in the last year on that campus
At the Bridge
regarding
City
sexual
campus?
abuse or rape?
To my knowledge, there was only one incident where it was peer on peer, and that was reported. And so we were able to relocate another youth. And I really believe at this point that youth that we moved off that campus may have been reintegrated back to the community. So,
So
but I can get you a more accurate response.
and I don't want to divulge the youth name or anything, but did this happen at night? How, if we're properly staffed at night, how did this incident occur?
So for PREA compliance, you don't actually have to have a completion of the act. In that case, I believe it was a youth basically coming on to another youth,
Okay.
and that was the report.
Because that's going to be my concern. I know we're going to Swanson later. I've received a lot of grief about you all going to non-dormitory style single rooms. And I've said to everyone and even parents who are upset, if one of us had a 13-year-old that was being placed in one of these facilities, I just believe you sleep better at night with the single rooms. Because what we've been seeing with physical attacks, sexual attacks across, the juvenile facilities has been alarming. And I know that people think it's more of a prison style, but I think it's more of a protective mechanism for youth, especially those younger youth who found themselves in these facilities. I think it's a lot of protection that they can sleep at night without worrying about what happens. Because I tell people that these children still go to school in the morning.
Yes.
And they're underperforming in those schools.
Yep.
And if you have to stay up all night to watch yourself sleep lightly, it does affect every aspect of your life in that facility. And so I am, slowly becoming more of an advocate for these single room style facilities for the protection of those younger youth who find themselves, unfortunately in those facilities. So just for a point of clarification, I am, and so I'm gonna make the motion today, supportive of Swanson going to, because, a lot of people are complaining, but I don't think they've walked those facilities. I don't think they've had one-on-one with those youth that are out there who's saying, I'm not sleeping at night.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sleeping at night. And that was the general concern at Swanson,
Yes, ma'am.
at Bridge City, and and our other facilities. Were the youth able to sleep undisturbed at night? And also, my concern became heavily for our constituents who are employed at those facilities. They were constantly under attack at night, in the dorms, during the daytime, whenever. And so for me, I know that it looks more like a prison, but for those who are in there, it feels more like safety in the night hours.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And so that's a perfect segue to talk about the West Feliciana campus, and that is the campus that's on the Angola grounds.
Before you move there,
Yes, ma'am.
we have another question by Senator Mizell.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was going to hold off, but my Senator Jackson opened the door, and I don't want to get into it at depth, but I want to kind of lay the groundwork that we find out more so we can have a more in-depth conversation about Senator Jackson's concerns were primarily peer on peer. My concerns are staff and juveniles. And the New York Times story just was horrific. And I'd really like to know if you could provide for us the numbers of cases reported, the number of cases prosecuted, and what actions were taken by juvenile justice in response to that, because the numbers and the horror stories of the residents were one thing, but the lack of prosecution were breathtaking.
That's fine.
And I think we there's got to be some accountability on that. So I know it's not contained today, but I'd like to, with the chairman's approval, to have a further conversation so that we can have some peace of mind that we've addressed it and it's not an ongoing situation.
I am happy to have that discussion, and so if now's an appropriate time, or if you want us to put something in writing, whatever's the pleasure of this body.
Well, I'd appreciate that. I'd like you to tell me how it's been addressed,
Yes, ma'am.
and then we can move forward
Yes,
with the
ma'am.
numbers. Okay.
Understand. So, Senator, myself, along with Mr. Potan, Deputy Secretary Summers, we went up to Ware at the direction of the governor. And so before going, we all read the article, and I was horrified by what was contained in that article, and even just some of the responses from the adults working with the children. What I can tell you, and in no way am I minimizing the atrocities that were contained within that article, what we found was the incidents dated from pretty much the opening of that facility all the way up until 2015, I think was maybe one of the last reports. Leadership at Ware is different. The person who was overseeing that facility is no longer the director. He has retired. What I can tell you, Senator Mizell, is that from the point that Deputy Secretary Summers came on board for OJJ, there were some conversations OJJ had with Ware, and as a result of those conversations, several things happened for implementation purposes. But before I even get to that, when it comes to those suicides, this body acted accordingly in passing legislation. So the Solon Law, requiring the detention screening instruments. There was something that happened after the Peterson youth death. And so that is something I felt the article did not highlight, was that as a state, we didn't just sit back silently, we took action. When it comes to those instances of staff on youth inappropriate interaction, one of the things that OJJ did was within, we required that there was prior reporting by Ware. And so I can say that I think it went back to at least 2015, 2014. You now have documented reports from Ware reporting any type of inappropriate sexual activity on that campus. And that's important because you got to have, that's where you get your oversight.
Right.
My counterparts at DCFS, they also went up to Ware when we had our conversation. And so I believe there were definitely some breakdowns in oversight at that facility. But the change in leadership is probably going to be a big factor in not seeing that happen anymore. We did submit our beliefs and recommendations to the governor on our findings. And so one of the things we believe is going to help is training of staff, constant training of staff, bringing on board screening of new hires. So one of the things we found out was that
It was one of their psychological evaluations they did for pre-employment, which is a very good tool. Didn't really look at the risk of sexual abuse. So we made a recommendation for a change to another tool that is recognized as a very powerful indicator, or being able to tell if a potential employee is going to be abusive.
to work at OJJ, Senator Mizell, you have to do a Diana screening, and that is a tool that we use to see if there's any indication of sexual predator behavior.
What does that stand for?
I don't believe it does. I think it's just Diana is actually the name.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. And so, unfortunately, Ware does not use that instrument, but as Mr. Potan mentioned, they have incorporated a process for new hires to have some type of psychological examination before being hired.
And I think the really distressing part of it was that it was one thing to hire the person and have them in that environment, but then to know that they were taking actions that were just repulsive in their, especially in their role of protecting the, and there was no punishment. I mean, there was no prosecution. That was really hard for me to believe that we would, because so now I'm wondering where the perpetrators, if they're still in the system.
Well, based upon what we were able to find out, was that you have had at least 4 to 5 staffers who were prosecuted in some format. Now, I know that at least in a few, they were able to plead down, but there were indictments and there was some form of prosecution that went forward. We did not find that any staffer who had actually been found guilty or pled guilty, they no longer work at Ware. So based upon the Ware process,
Were they? My fear is that that they're really not being prevented from being put into another situation where they could keep that behavior going. I just want some peace of mind about that.
no, ma'am, and I think your concerns are valid.
So I think when you look at the Louisiana detention standards, especially at the detention facility there located at Ware there are, if a person is convicted of certain offenses, they are barred from employment at that agency based on licensure requirements. The sexual offense against a minor is going to be one that immediately bars them from employment. They would not be allowed to work at that facility or any other detention center across the state of Louisiana.
Okay. Yeah, that was definitely going to be my question. But what other actions were taken?
By the Ware leadership? Or?
Yeah, no, well, with those individuals who had offended the young people, what else happened? I mean, other than being barred, what else happened?
So there were staff that were, like I said, convicted. I believe based off the article, there were, I believe at least 3 that were placed on probation. I think you have 1 still pending trial, and another person, a more frequent incident where they are, or a more recent incident, I should say, they are also awaiting trial at this point. Now, whether they are those 2 are still incarcerated, I'm not sure about that.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
You can go
How
ahead,
long
Jeff.
have they been awaiting trial?
That I don't know. I'm
I don't
sorry.
know. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly because I know there was
And are they working while they're awaiting trial?
Yeah.
not at the facility, no, ma'am. So if they're working at another location, doing at McDonald's or wherever else, I'm not sure.
And keep in mind, senators, that again, this is a contractor that we contract with. The local DA, the local sheriff were all involved in these criminal investigations. What we found was once the youth made that report and the matter was turned over to the local law enforcement officials, that piece worked. Now, the abuse that was happening, that was what I believe was the failure. But once it was reported, it does appear that somebody was made aware, because that was our question to our counterparts. Once you became aware that this child was making a complaint, what did you do? And what we were advised is that when a complaint is made, that staffer is put on suspension. They cannot come onto the campus, and they wait until there's a finalization of the criminal matter.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So is there anything that's placed in their file going forward where they are prohibited, or there is something that denotes that they were arrested and there were charges filed or whatever to prevent them from working with children in any arena?
So if they're arrested, it goes on their rap sheet, and whenever, as a requirement of employment at a detention facility, you must obtain a criminal background check prior to that person arriving to the facility to start work. So you have to have a cleared background check. As a former manager of a detention center, if we had an individual that had some type of criminal arrest on their rap sheet, we would then send it to licensure for clearance. Licensure would then review it and clear that person for hire at that point.
Okay. Senator Jackson.
I think you took care of it. I just, that was my concern. I understand, but what if they're not convicted? Like, what if they plead to a misdemeanor? Is their license revoked then?
The where facility or
The individual who's committed the act.
If it depends on the offense that they plead down to. If it's the statute distinguishes which offenses are barred from working in that type of facility. So it would be dependent upon what that plea agreement was. Because if it was pled down to, say, a simple assault, that is not a barred offense.
Yeah, but see, that's my concern. To me, if you commit any offense that you have to plead to, and maybe we need to change the licensure requirements on that. This is my thought. If you're working anywhere in the state of Louisiana, for the state of Louisiana, whether it's at a juvenile facility or otherwise, and you commit a crime against a juvenile, we probably need to look at those licensure requirements, because you shouldn't be able to reenter, and you, at the very least, should be put on a no hire list. But I look, you know how this is. If sometimes in certain jurisdictions, if you know the right people, you leave the case laying cold for a while, you can plead down to a simple assault, especially if that juvenile who's in that facility doesn't have parents or guardians who are advocating every day that person shows up at court. My concern is that you are sometimes allowed to plead down to something else, although the crime that you committed fits aggravated battery, sexual assault, and then you're right back in a facility, whether state-owned or not, working with juveniles. I think that maybe it's time for us to look at those licensure requirements, because my thing is, if you plead guilty to anything in a juvenile facility, you shouldn't be able to re-enter another juvenile facility, nor should you be able to work in a capacity with juveniles, especially if it's something sexual in nature and you plead down to something just to keep you off the sex offender list.
right. So what I would say,
And that's my, you know what I mean? That's an issue, and I know that you didn't set those, licensure requirements up, but it may be time to review, or even if we keep it that way, maybe a no hire list with the state. Right. So if we don't touch the licensure requirements, we may need to visit some type of no hire list that you go on if you plead down to anything and you've worked with in the juvenile facility for the state.
so, and that's what I wanted to really distinguish, though, OJJ run facility versus which is private. Now, for our facilities, our policies, our protocols would prohibit that person from being rehired within our facility, because we have very strict policy on an inappropriate relationship with a youth. That's a violation of our policies, and so that staffer would be disciplined and would likely be terminated. And when I say likely, because what has happened is, when we have had those kind of incidents on our facilities, that is the process, that the staffer is suspended. We do the termination, and that's based upon our policies. We don't have to wait for an adjudication or a conviction. Our policies say that if a staffer has an inappropriate relationship with a youth, then that is an automatic grounds for termination. So for your state facility, you do have that structure in place.
Right. And so do we have a contract with Ware?
We do. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in our contract, couldn't we put the guidelines they follow, like the Diana
screening.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
screening.
Yes.
If we know it works for the state, and if we know we have it in place, and when we're contracting out, these are still our youth. Mm-hmm. These are still people that are under our jurisdiction that we need to protect. Couldn't we put in their contract that they follow these procedures in order to have a contract with us?
I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
So that's going to be my strong suggestion. I know that these issues with Rare just came about, but anyone we contract with to take care of our youth, the procedures that you follow, if it's good enough for us, if we found it to be protective mechanisms, also could we require them to put a no hire policy in, meaning they check with the state facilities and see if that person is on the no hire list. They have a no hire list that they submit to the state as well, because we don't want people coming over from Ware to our facilities as well. My thought is that anyone we contract with should be under the same requirements. So I just think, number one, no hire lists in our facilities as well as facilities we contract with, and that if any of the facilities like Rare that we contract with are going to be housing our youth, that they be under the same screening requirements and protective requirements that we are. You don't enter into a contract with us, because I don't feel comfortable having a standard of care for the youth that are in our facilities and then having a different standard of care for the youth for the facilities we contract with. If we're protecting children, we need to protect them at the same level wherever they are, and we need to be able to track that protection.
I don't disagree.
And I know that both of you share the same heart, but I think that remedies the issues with is Rare doing something different. Are youth fully protected at Rare? Where? What does that look like? What it should look like if we're contracting with you, it should look like the same thing we do. And we know that we're not saying we're perfect. We're still working on it. But as this committee and other committees and the legislature passes bills, and I think it'll be incumbent upon us members that when we pass bills regarding our state facilities, we start adding in are any facility contracted with OJJ, because that clears it up, that it doesn't have to be put in every contract. And maybe, Madam Chairperson, that would be my suggestion for the committee, staff to do an overview of all the requirements we have in place for OJJ facilities and go back into that statute, kind of like we did, Hewitt, with the cleanup we did last year in another subject matter, and clean that up to say, and any facility that OJJ contracts with, because then we don't have to worry about, and not saying you won't do it, but I just don't want anything to slip through the cracks, especially when it concerns children. So your contract should include it. But I believe our law should also extend whatever requirements we put on you as far as, protection, screenings. Because when we get down to mental health screenings, a lot of what's happening is based on the mental health of those juveniles who are in these facilities and things that have gone untreated, right? And so I believe that mental health screenings, as we've talked before, is going to play a huge role in that. I know you've made some tweaks to how, when a juvenile enters your facilities, am I correct, that they have proper mental health screening? We want to make sure that even in mental health screenings, if they enter a facility we're contracted with, then they have that extensive mental health screening. Because a lot of what we're seeing with attacks on guards, with attacks on other youth, are just untreated mental health conditions and emotional conditions that spill over. Someone raped me, so I was violated, and so I'm going to violate someone else, right?
Yes.
We have to recognize that these are youth, and as heinous as the crimes are, we have to recognize that they're not fully developed mentally. That's just a fact. Scientifically, it's been studied. And we have to put more barriers in place. But we also, because we know at some point they're coming out of the youth facilities as adults, okay? This is the issue. If we have them for 5 years and we don't address their emotional and mental health needs, then we failed them and society. Because now what we have is an adult rapist on our hands, or an adult person who believes that violence is the answer. I just really think as we go forward, we need to look at mental health screenings on a larger, and I know you're doing that in your intake, but we need to know what that result. And so that's my next request, is that if you're not going to present that today, that next time you're before us, we need to know what mental health screening someone's going to, and after that juvenile goes through that mental health screening, how do we address any mental health or emotional issues that are found? Because that, to me, is the most serious thing. You have to change a person's mindset to change their actions and their heart, right? And so if someone has been abused themselves, sometimes they're more likely to become an abuser. How do we stop that cycle? If someone has been sexually abused, they're more likely to act out in that area. And I know your heart. I know the department's heart. I understand that, but we need to get to the crust of it. Some of the money that's coming down federally before we come into session and allocate it, to companies. How do we allocate, if possible, some of the money that the federal government has passed for mental health treatment in schools and other places to you all? What would that look like? I really would like to see a comprehensive plan of not only mental health screening, but also mental health and emotional health treatment for these youth. And I'm going to end with this. The reason why I feel like it's so important, there was a 11-year-old in a facility who acted out, who said at the age of 6, I was made to smoke marijuana. At the age of 8 or 9, I was made to commit my first crime. And this is the life that we live.
Yeah.
If we know this and we're hearing these stories, we have to address it at some point. Lastly, and Madam Chairperson, I hope not, because I know I'm long-winded, but it's passionate about the kids. What does it look like for placement afterwards? How do we examine them throughout the mental health and emotional treatment to determine whether or not, if they're coming out at their 15th birthday or their 16th birthday, whether we need to return them to the home they came from? Because I think, and I know that's a lot to put on you, and I know some of it requires financial support, but how do we, determine whether or not the home we're returning them to is fit, or we're returning them to only return to us or to an adult facility? I think that, I know that's your heart and those are questions that need to be answered, but I really would like to see a plan, because the return home plan for me, and when I talk to these juveniles when they're on their second round at, our facilities, has become questionable. We're returning some of them to the same environment they left. And I'm not saying that it was a bad environment. I know some parents who worked really hard and their kids just decided to get with someone at school and become the person that the parent did not push. But I also know some kids that are being returned to environments that are forcing them to commit these crimes. And that's the thing. If we're returning them to those environments, we're going to see them again, most likely in adult facilities, when we no longer can help them. So those are, I know I said a lot. I'm sure you guys took notes.
Not at all.
Those are the things I'm looking to see. So I had to return home plan to that and what it looks like. And whether or not judges can keep some criteria in those return home plans when they're on probation. I know we can. What does that criteria need to be? How do we hold the parent and the child accountable on the return home? You return a child home to a place where they have nothing to eat.
Right.
We need to know what that home looks like.
So, Senator, what we will definitely provide to this body is there is a whole reintegration process, and within the and that's statutory. Those are the things that are supposed to be addressed. Because just as you said, we don't want to send that child who's succeeded back into an environment where they're going to fail. So we can share with you the whole reintegration process.
And I would, because I'm seeing a recidivism rate that's alarming. And I think you are too, when you think about it.
You see it.
Yeah.
You definitely see it.
Right.
I think our numbers show that overall, most of the youth who exit out aren't coming back, but there is that population that.
Right. Are we tracking them in adult facilities?
It's my understanding.
The ability to do that. Yeah.
Yes, it's my understanding that they are
I would
doing the
love to
track.
see those numbers too. Okay. Because we're letting them out at 16, 17. The next crime they commit is usually, in an adult facility. And that's been my concern. And I know I've said a mouthful, but I think if we're going to address it, we have to take the holistic approach, or we end up back here 5 years from now having the same conversations. And how we take that holistic approach, I don't know, but I look for you for answers
Yes, ma'am.
to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. And we have some of our fine attorneys who are in the room taking notes and making sure that that information is being recorded and will be actually a part of the process, making sure that as we move forward in this whole process that is included, and making sure that as we get ready to do legislation, if necessary, that is also a part of it, and waiting to also receive information back from you all. Probably, I haven't set the meeting for our next meeting, but I don't know if it'll be in January or February.
Okay.
But by that time, we certainly would like to have that information, if at possible, before, so that we can talk about it once you guys get here.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Okay.
we definitely will be able to give updates on the WARE investigation. We are working with the Inspector General's office. We've shared the contracts we've had, and pretty much I sat down and had a conversation about our findings. And so we hope to be able to give you an update as well.
Okay, thank you.
And
Proceed.
yes, ma'am. And so we have opened up the West Feliciana facility, which is on the Angola State Penitentiary grounds, and that is a Tier 1 facility. And so we can house up to 24 youth. Currently, we only have, I think we're down to 7, but quite honestly, we may be down to 5. So, unfortunately, with some of these youth, especially the older youth, if they continue to commit criminal acts while they're in our custody, that is now an adult crime. And so I do know we had an incident yesterday, and so 2 of the 18-year-olds are being removed, and they will be housed in the local adult jail, and they're going to be prosecuted as adults. That's what we recognize happens with the tier 1 youth, the more high-risk youth. And so we are able currently to house 8 youth. We're hiring additional staff so we can go to phase 2, because that facility can hold up to 24 youth total. Going back up north, so we're coming to Swanson, and so at the Swanson campus, Senator Jackson, you were talking about the mental health needs. So Swanson is the campus where we have a mental health wing for those youth who have more severe mental health diagnosis. In addition, we have an intensive mental health treatment program at Swanson that can work with 48 youth. Swanson Monroe currently is a tier 1, tier 2 facility, but we are in the process of completing construction on the new Swanson campus. And that's what Senator Jackson spoke of, those single room. That's going to be a game changer for the state of Louisiana. Even with some of the youth that have cycled through the West Feliciana Angola site, what the young people have told us is that, well, I do feel that I can sleep at night. And so we do believe that that's going to provide a high security level facility, and we anticipate that campus opening up sometime in the fall of 2023. So going to what have we done for safety? And so one of the things we've done is on all of our campuses, we have installed, it's called the Valen system.
Before you go
Yes,
any
ma'am.
further, Senator Jackson has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, we come around to Swanson, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Swanson is in a residential neighborhood. We had a lot of escapes. That facility is not set to open until fall
Next year.
Yes, ma'am.
next
Next year.
So are we continuing the contracts with probation officers?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
hearing they're going to be pulling out, but I want to make sure, because I'm hearing that the probation officers cannot continue at the capacity they are, working 12-hour shifts with us, and then going back and working their jobs. So how are we leveling that out? Because I understand that there's a lot of burnout at our facility in Monroe.
Yes, ma'am. So, Senator Jackson, now that we have the Angola site, that gives us an extra resource to remove those youth who we know could potentially engage in either that violent behavior on staff, peers, or escape. So we are in conversation with Secretary LeBlanc. We still have the adult probation and parole and DOC staff at Swanson. The agreement is that they will continue to stay as we build our staffing numbers up at Swanson. And in fact, Senator, I think we're going to have a big job fair November 29th.
Because nobody wants to come to Swanson and work. You know, I'm always
Yes, ma'am.
straightforward about it.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, the population where we live is Swanson is not just one of those run-to jobs.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what's still the starting pay at Swanson?
So at this point, as a JJS 1, so that's the Juvenile Specialist 1, the starting pay is $37,000, but we went in and did some pay enhancement, and so we've shortened the period that individual will be on probation. So in 6 months, they can go from 37 up to 40,000, and in 18 months, they can actually be at 45,000, and that is a position that does not require a college degree. And so we did that pay incentive to actually try to attract more staff.
Right.
I do want to let you know about data, because Mr. Patin and I, we believe in data. So we kept hearing that, oh, you can't hire, you don't have enough people, nobody wants to come and work. Well, we actually went and pulled some data, and what we found is that we've had a lot of people apply to work for OJJ. And in particular, we actually found the numbers were good for Swanson. And so what we're working on internally is that we want to improve our onboarding process. So from the time somebody says, I want to work with you, being able to quickly get them onboarded to be able to come and work with us.
So are they passing all of your clearance to work?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we just waiting too long and they find another job? What?
In my opinion, that's what I see from the data, that for some of these individuals who are saying, I'm ready to work today, if you wait 30 days to get back with them, they have likely found another job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long does it take to do all of your assessments?
I think the complete assessment process is about 7 days.
Yeah.
When you consider drug screens, criminal background checks, TB test, psychologicals, it's about a 7-day process.
7-day process.
So since we left last time, I mean, we realized we got to do something about in hiring more staff. And so we've been working with the commissioner's office. And so we're in the process of creating our own HR department. We found that was a missing piece. And so we'll have an HR director now, 2 HR managers, and several HR specialists. And I feel pretty confident that's going to help speed up the ability to onboard a new hiree.
But we're guaranteed right now that probation and parole will stay on board until you're fully staffed at Swanson.
That is a guarantee. And so every week we are having conversation, looking at numbers. We have not decreased the presence of adult P&P at the Swanson campus because we know that's a larger campus. And so, yes, ma'am.
And I know this is going to be controversial. But I'm going to ask it. Adult P&P now can have mace on our juvenile campus, right?
They do carry mace, yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
what about our employees?
So we have done some training on the use of chemical agents. Of course, we want to make sure that's being used on a very rare and limited basis. However, we do have staff that's undergoing that training to know how to properly use it and when to use it. Now, I want to make it clear, we still believe in Lamad. We believe in doing de-escalation processes, and chemical agents should only be used if it's a matter of somebody's going to get hurt or you are going to hurt yours.
No, I understand that the presence of a chemical agent is usually to deter behavior.
Yes, ma'am.
The hope is that we deter behavior and never have to use it.
Yes, ma'am.
But if it's been an effective deterrence for those who are adult P&P, it just, kind of I question whether or not it would be a good deterrence when we pull them out. And that's, my concern and how we approaching that. We don't want anyone maced, but if it's been a great deterrence, we've seemed to have very little escapes since the adult P&P have been on campus. And so maybe the question about the mace was very forward, but what else is it that's deterring, this behavior that we were seeing weekly in Swanson?
So I think it's a combination of, like you said, chemical spray as a deterrent, but also just physical presence. When you increase the number of staff that's on the campus with these rovers who are the probation and parole officers, we've increased the numbers where when an incident is occurring, we have 4 to 5 staff members that are walking into the room saying, what's going on? Well, the kids realize now it's 1 to 7 instead of 1 to 2. So it's a different scenario, and the youth become more compliant, quite frankly.
Right.
So I think that there is definitely a combination, and with our increased staffing, we will be doing increased training with creating our own, in a sense, probation and parole rover teams. It'll be JJS rover teams, but they would be serving that same purpose.
And also recognizing that Swanson will be the new Tier 1 facility. We are in the process of putting together a TAC team. And so that will be a part of that staff level up there that should an event occur, that we have specially trained staff who will be able to go in and tactically work with the youth to de-escalate them.
And I think even beyond that, when you can put in all kind of devices, you can put in all kind of folks, but you have to put in the right type of folks. One of the things that has been implemented, and it's further down in our report, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but we're implementing trust-based relationship training with all of our staff. We're utilizing ACEs, so that way we can figure out what are those traumatic events that are going on, so that way we can really build a relationship, find out what's going on, so that way when I walk into the room, a young man looks at me and says, "You're a friend. I can come to the side and talk to you about what's going on and de-escalate without having to get physically involved with that youth. So
like
it's
at,
all just pieces to the puzzle.
I get it. So like at Swanson, mental health treatment, how many employees do we have at Swanson that provide mental health treatment?
So we do have a doctor at Swanson. So he's employed with OJJ, and so he's on the site. We do have our social workers, case workers who work on the Swanson campus. And so then you also have your JJS staff, but they have also been trained on working with that population of youth. Yes, ma'am.
And you know why I'm asking. We welcome Bridge City, and I don't want them to have to go there and go lift. They don't have to. And so, we welcome a number of Bridge City youth to the Swanson facility. I think it was the right thing to do. It's controversial in my area, but the truth is youth have to be housed and treated somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
The housed is one thing, the treated is where I'm gearing toward now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
The last thing I would just say on the security side, because I do think this was really huge for our agency. So on every campus, we have a surveillance system around the fence line. It's called a balance system. And so that now enables my staff to detect if somebody's around the fence line, and staff has been trained on how to work that system, and we believe it is helping us. As I kind of wrap up, just giving you some updates on education, where we are education on our campuses. So since we were here back in July with the letter, we have had 15 youth actually obtain their high school diploma. We've had 6 youth obtain their high set or complete the high set. We do have the implementation of Jobs for America graduates on our campus. We are now coming out of the pandemic. We're still doing the virtual graduations, and we may actually keep that. So for those parents who cannot travel, or family members who can't travel to the graduations on our campus, being able to allow them to participate virtually is something we want to keep in place. Implementation of the Department of Education's Jumpstart Graduation Pathway and career technical programs. Also implementation of the electronic discipline reporting system to assist with identifying behavior trends on our campuses. Vocational skills is something that we believe is important for those youth who may not choose to go to college. And so we are partnered with the Bossier Community College, Fletcher Community College, and we have a future partnership with Louisiana Technical College in Alexandria, because we want to have a full complement of educational services to our youth. Something that Deputy Secretary Summers did first when he got there was he brought in a new head of our education department, as well as a special educational teacher. We do believe that we are seeing some positive results of this focus on the education. And so one of our campuses actually was able to go from an F rating up to a C rating. And what I always try to emphasize to the public is the children who come to us, as we all know, they have all forms of trauma, all forms of abuse that they are trying to overcome, and we're putting them in a classroom setting and putting the expectation that they are learning. I believe that the things we're doing on our campuses is starting to show those positive results. So we're very proud of the fact that the Riverside School, which is at Bridge City, again, went from an F rating up to a C rating. The Southside Swanson campus, we are very close to also being at a higher rating. And so we believe that these are improvements that we're making on our campus. I know that there was an education report put out by the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. And so we are working in partnership with that center. I don't dispute some of the findings in that report, and we're working collaboratively to make sure that we as a agency can make sure our children are having all their educational needs met. So in closing, what I would say, Senator Barrow, when we were before you in July, yes, we were looking at the Jetson grounds as a possible placement for youth. We have moved away from that, so that proposal of opening the winter wing, with the opening of Angola, those youth were able to be transferred to that site. We did make those improvements to the winter wing, and so I know you had some questions about that. We spent probably right a little bit under $1 million to refurbish the winter wing. And currently, the plan would be, Senator, that only if we had to do some type of emergency evacuation, at least we have a refurbished building that we could move children safely to. But there are no plans to occupy that space right now, Senator.
Okay.
And I know that was one of the questions you had.
Yes, and then the other part of the questions were regarding the financial cost to make the adjustments that you guys made. And so as I look at the budget, and we'll get to you, Senator Mizell, from for this year, it was roughly $160 million, right? How much have you guys actually exceeded that budget in any way in making these adjustments, moving to Angola, etc.?
We have not exceeded 160 million. We did have some money that we were able to utilize for repairs and improvements, and so we've been kind of shifting dollars to do the Angola site. That was right at 550,000 to be able to go in there, renovate the building, put some security measures. So we have cameras throughout the building. We wanted to make sure the building was less punitive and more rehabilitative. And so we have 3 classrooms in that building now. We have space for healthcare services, medical services, counseling and treatment. And so Ms. Zapatan played a big role in helping us with going into the building and identifying what we needed to do to bring it up to our scale. But Senator, that came out to right at 600,000.
Okay, so that was not a big chunk of money.
No, ma'am.
Have y'all had to make any other investments, maybe at Swanson or any of the other facilities as we are waiting for them to come online, or the new building to come online?
Swanson is, because we have the new building that we're building out there, that's where a lot of our dollars are going. The others are just typical repairs that we would have to
Okay,
make.
yeah. Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions regarding the budget. So as I look here at the budget, and they have it divided out of North region, Central, Southwest region, and Southeast region. I want you to tell me which facility is in each region. One of the things that really caught my attention is the fact that in 22 budget, you guys have more employees that you actually requested, and then in 23 you have less for every region. And I would like to know the rationale behind that, as we know how great the need is, and how many employees do you actually have hired. And I don't know if you have that information offhand, but if not, I'd like to have that information.
I can get you, because I want to get you an exact number, because I will definitely say we have a lot of unfilled positions. And so we're utilizing some of those positions to create a HR department. But when it comes to the frontline staff,
How many?
to fill the HR department,
Yes.
Senator, that's only like maybe 10
10?
positions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because I see that one thing that I noticed is that in administration, you had 45 that you had requested last year, but this year you had 48. That was the only place where there was actually extra or additional requests, but for everything else, it was less. So tell me this: what facilities fall within the northern region?
So that's going to be the Swanson Monroe facility and also the Swanson Columbia facility.
Okay. Tell me Central, Southwest.
So Central is going to be Acadiana Bunkie, and then we also have the Acadiana St. Martinville facility.
Okay. And then Southeast.
And so southeast, you have the West Feliciana, which is on the grounds of Angola, as well as the Bridge City campus down in Jefferson. And that is a good point. At the time of this budget, West Feliciana Angola was not in the picture. So we definitely will have a need for more positions because that wasn't originally factored in our budget.
So as you guys are preparing the budget for the governor, that's due in November, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's due. So you guys have to submit that by the end of the month.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at this point, do you know what the ask is now for the budget for the upcoming year?
My undersecretary is not with me, so I
Okay.
can definitely get that information to you, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I like to have that information as well, so I can look at that comparatively. As it relates to the work that you guys do in the when you actually are integrating the families back to their family, when you're integrating the children back to their families, what other agencies do you guys work with?
So a lot of times we will tap into wraparound providers. And so we definitely partner with LDH for those services. I have probation and parole staff. And so, of course, the youth will have a probationary or parole staffer that will work with them. And we really start tapping into the community resources to support the family.
Which could mean what? I mean, just
House.
agencies that. So, because I'm looking at the contract services amount, which actually went up as well, it's $39 million, and I would like to know some of the contracts that you guys actually have and with whom.
Yes, ma'am. I can get you that information.
Okay. Oh, Senator Mizell, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right. On a different track.
Yes, ma'am.
I really appreciate the information about the education, and I mean, I just see this. If we look at it from a different way, we have a tremendous opportunity to change the track that these kids are on.
Yep.
And when you said 15 youth have obtained a high school diploma, what's the time frame that those 15 youth? What time period are you talking about?
So these are likely older youth who have been with us, and so those achievements they probably were with us, say, 18 months, and within that period they were able to continue to work their schooling to either graduate or get the high set.
So they start and finish within your oversight.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
what happens when a young person is there and maybe they'll get started and they leave? Is there a process that follows through on that and gives it the?
Yep.
Tell me about that.
And that was the report that the Center for Children's Rights issued, that where I feel we can make some improvement is reintegrating that youth back to their home school and making sure that they're not behind when they return back.
It's a huge hurdle that you're talking about.
But I
because,
think it's one we
they're
gotta
not likely
achieve.
to have been in school. Are most of these kids currently in school before they go right to? I would think that they would have been on a truancy list, whatever that means. I mean,
I would say what we tend to see, Senator Mizell, is that the average youth that's placed in our custody, they're probably 2 grades behind academically. And so it is a challenge because you're trying to catch them up to where they need to be. And then, as you said, now we're integrating you back to the community. I honestly do feel, and I think we have the right team in place on the education side now, making sure that when that child goes back home, they can just keep going and they're not missing. What I find sometimes is that there may be a delay in records. So we're trying to transfer our records to the local school district to make sure that credits are being accepted. And that's an area where I think we can improve. And so you asked about partners. So
Yes,
Department
I
of
just wanted to
Education.
bring up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Department of Education.
well,
That's a
I mean,
partner.
I mean, Senator Jackson and I both are on Education Committee.
Yes.
This is game changer for life to me
Yes.
if we can do that, because when a kid has a diploma and can get a job,
Yep.
you're changing the direction altogether. But we can't make it where I'm naive, and I don't even think a kid that's gone through what these kids have gone through are going to walk into a high school and just walk in like it's another day. That's not that we can't. I just don't see that happening.
And some of the conversation that my staff has with the youth is because you will identify that.
Right.
You probably have a better chance with us to at least get that high set or diploma. So let's really focus on that. And so we do have those conversations, but we have a lot of children that will come in and say, no, I'm only here for a short period of time. I want to graduate. So just keep me where I am. So when I go home, I'm not going to be behind.
But can't we incentivize them? And
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
there's ways that we put a greater value on the long term than.
Yes, ma'am.
And anyway,
There-
I'd like to continue this conversation
Yes, ma'am.
on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. I would like to say thank you to you and Mr. Curtis and Mr. Patan for your work, and to the Secretary in his absence. Certainly, I do believe that you guys have the right heart for this job and that you're committed to it. The thing that I guess makes me very sad is that some of these children, they start off behind the 8 ball. They are born into situations that they did not ask for, could not control. And I think Senator Jackson gave a great illustration about the young man who started off. I mean, his start was very wrong, and it was very tough. It could be very tough for him to come out of that situation. But you guys become, to me, the stopgate that can actually change their entire life, giving them some sense of hope, because many of these young people have lost hope. They don't see no way out, and the folks that they depended on and was supposed to be able to trust have let them down. And so I want to thank you for what you're doing, but I tell you, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Again, Senator Jackson brought up a lot of issues. She and Senator Mizell, especially from the article that came forth in terms of some internal things that you guys can actually do, but then there are going to be some things that we need to do as well. And so I'm expecting that. So again, I would like to know about the budgetary issues.
Ma'am.
And the report that you guys will be submitting to the governor for the budget. If I can have that prior to, I would like to really have that before you submit it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank y'all so very much. Are there any other comments?
Oh, no, ma'am. Thank
Oh,
you.
ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. All right. Now we are here from the Department of Children and Family Services. We have our new secretary at the table, new interim secretary.
Good afternoon.
How you doing? You introduce yourself just for the record.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Senator Bear, my name is Terry Ricks. I'm the Deputy Secretary, Acting Secretary for the Department of Children and Family Services.
All right. So, Madam Interim Secretary, let me just first kind of start off with saying we welcome you. We know you. You've been serving in the Deputy Assistant Secretary role for some time. And after the resignation of the Secretary, you were next in line
Yes, ma'am.
to receive the mantle. As many of you may see, I do have the photos of the two babies here, which I am going to maintain and keeping because they both lived in my district. To my right, Mitchell Robinson III, and to my left, Jahari Paul, and I may be mispronouncing his first name, because that's going to serve as a reminder for me in terms of my commitment to this issue. I know that there are not many things that you can say to these particular cases because of the litigation, but I wanted to serve as a constant reminder. And if it gives anyone if it upsets anyone to see their pictures, then that's going to be on their behalf, because for me, it's not. Those babies did not ask to be in the situation that they were in. And prior to this hearing, we didn't even know about little Paul, because we was planning on having this hearing just to have a follow-up. And then before we can even get the information to the department, we've learned about him. We owe the children, because they are the only group that truly don't have any voice and no one to speak for them. So we have to speak for them. So while I know that you have a lot on your plate, I know that you're going in trying to look at what can be done differently. There are just a couple of questions that I will have as it relates to the process. And I couldn't find my notebook from our last hearing when we talked about the different layers. So we know we have the tiers in terms of cases, and when a tier 1, tier 2 comes in, those are emergencies. They receive immediate or within 24-hour assistance. But I want to talk a little bit about the layer of employees, and I want to talk a little bit about Baton Rouge in terms of our system, because this bothers me greatly, because they are both in Baton Rouge. That's number one. When Baton Rouge was supposed to be having additional wraparound services. So I want to make sure in terms of our wraparound services in the Baton Rouge area, what does that look like? And if anything has happened to fill any gaps, because we have we have the caseworker, then the supervisor,
Yes, ma'am.
then the manager, then there's a regional,
And then
what's the regional's name? Regional coordinator? What is it called? Regional director?
the next would be an area director who's
Area
over the
director.
region of Baton Rouge. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the regional area director is responsible for just Baton Rouge or several areas?
The Baton Rouge region.
Just the Baton Rouge region. Okay, so,
And then the regional administrator is actually over 3 regions,
okay.
administering 3 regions.
So, as much as you can give me, tell me how that process worked to try to make sure that there are no gaps.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
May I first thank you for the beautiful pictures of the children that we lost too soon. I also want to speak the name of Ezekiel as well. Ezekiel Harry from Homa, Mitchell Robinson from Baton Rouge, and Jari Paul from Baton Rouge. These children represent all the children in Louisiana that we are concerned for. We're concerned to look at what happened with them, and to look at all the children that are in Louisiana, so that we can figure out how, as a system, a complete system, which includes DCFS, but is of course much larger than DCFS, so that we can figure out how to address what brings the children to our caseload, or bring them to our attention at all. To answer your question, I want to say to you, Senator Barrow, that it's been a learning curve for me this week. Many things I learned this week were things I really had seen already, and yet had the opportunity to double down on that learning. That is to say, things like those persons who show up to work here every day are committed souls, and they have taken this oath seriously. To answer the question relative to what is the current structure in Baton Rouge, I would like to add to it a statement that we are looking at the structures to ensure that they are what they should be given our current scenario and the needs that we have. I shared with you, I think earlier this week, and love to share with the committee at this time, that we had some more recent conversations with Casey Family Programs. We had day-long meetings on Wednesday that were set already before these committees came. We've actually been preparing for it for about 9 months. But with that, we took a look. It was a very timely meeting for me to meet with entire leadership staff of child welfare from across the state, all those who work in the state office, all those who work as area directors throughout the state, and those that work as regional administrators. They were in the room when we met with Casey, which also gave me an opportunity to see them and speak with them face to face, to address and hear from them about what they see as concerns and barriers, the things that are pain points for them. And we had some very productive conversations with Casey in the room, where they were leading us to understand where are our pain points and where can they bring their expertise to assist us in moving forward. In that conversation, there was a specific group that was set up to talk, and I happened to be in this particular group for this exercise, where we were talking about the structure of the agency, how we hire, who we hire, how we retain, and what efforts we currently have going on to addressing the pain points that we've identified, and whether or not it's enough, or some of even the 7 strategies that we have identified, have we made sure to remove something that we should not be working on while we start working on something new? That being said, what has happened in Baton Rouge is we talked about sort of the line of supervision for a caseworker. And you had that right. A caseworker reports to a supervisor, who reports to a manager, who reports to the area director. But there are other support roles in the office. And what we have installed in Baton Rouge to assist us with some of the things that have come up has taken some good time arm wrestling with civil service, and they have been super supportive. But we have added, for example, someone to assist the area director with the administrative responsibilities of the office. When we liken back to a time where I was the undersecretary of this department under Governor Blanco, where we did have, of course, more personnel spots, we were using them in various ways that we have not been in the last 15 years or so, based on the fact that we've had less TO spots available to us. So adding back in someone to assist the area director with the many administrative responsibilities, so that the AD, as we call them, can actually be more focused on the practice of child welfare, as opposed to how many people have taken all of the training required by civil service or by the Office of Risk Management, or have we finalized all of the paperwork to switch someone who was hired into a job appointment into a permanent TO position. Those things are super important, but they do take away from the focus of child welfare practice. That was new. The other thing that has recently been added to Baton Rouge is a case assigner position. We did not have that in our recent structure, so that there is one person responsible for receiving the cases from our centralized intake, which is a centralized unit that receives the calls and receives those reports that are made by what we call the portal, an online manner.
When was the case assigner added?
Within the last few weeks.
Prior to or after?
So we had someone beginning to flesh out that role, but we just hired the person who will keep that role Monday. I believe they started Monday.
Okay.
Case assigner.
Okay. Okay.
So that's two examples of what we do when adding what we've added in Baton Rouge that is not yet in other places across the state. Maybe one or two of them is in Baton Rouge, but trying to pull in what we've learned and what we've learned from these unfortunate events. And we've also, of course, had what we call the rapid response team that has come in from around the state. So we started with a crisis team, and we still have people that have basically moved to Baton Rouge to work on the crisis team to fill in some of the vacancies while we're hiring, and those persons are being trained. In addition to the crisis team, when the majority of them went back, we then also used what we called a rapid response team. And the difference really is that we did a call out, and 90 persons from child welfare and other areas came in, but they only came in for a week. And they were given some lower risk cases as well as closing some cases that have not yet been closed. And there's many reasons why cases haven't yet been closed, and we can talk about that if you like. And currently we have 5 sets of 2 in the latest round of rapid response to be able to continue the support of the work in Baton Rouge, in addition to the nurses that we pulled in to assist with those substance exposed newborns, which we have talked to you about before, that continues to increase.
Before you go any further, I want to stop right there for a minute.
Yes.
I know Senator Jackson has a few questions, but let me tell you what my concern is. And this is not something that you could perhaps necessarily answer. Mm-hmm. But part of my concern is when we had our hearing, so we had our hearing, our first hearing, and then Health and Welfare has had 2 hearings. And at the last hearing, there were specific questions that was asked about the Mitchell case at that point. And we went through what was supposed to have been in place. What bothers me is if we had those things in place in Baton Rouge and it's still seemingly we missed it to some degree. And I understand the scenario. You and I went through the differences of the case. The cases are not the same, but both children did die from fentanyl. But I'm looking at where the ball fell in the Baton Rouge region. That's because that is what bothers me. It bothers me that I feel like there were extra safeguards or extra measures put in place to ensure that we didn't have a child to fall through the crack, but yet we did with a lot of additional services that no one else in the state necessarily has.
So thank you. And it's a perfect question, and it is what the X that we're solving for. And we didn't have the case assigner at the time. However, what I do want to say is that the other thing that happened coming from this hearing soon after Mitchell's death, mm-hmm. we met here, we talked about, we put a lot of things in case, including a change in policy, right? And so I had to have the staff write this up for me so that I might say it right. And okay. Sometimes that glasses work and sometimes they don't. I think I just have dry eyes. The last time we appeared in the committee, we presented a policy change involving children aged 0 to 3. Subsequent to that, there was an increase of 26% of new cases from August to September. While many of the cases rose to a level where investigation was warranted, many didn't. We're in the process of evaluating the policy change now and working with mandated reporters to help them better understand which cases they are required to report under this policy. Now, to answer your question, the other thing that changed is more cases came in. And so we are dealing with the same 24 hours that everybody has. And with all the people that are in, there were more, even more cases that were triggered. And so when the process of reassigning went through a manager, not the case assigner, that's the new part. And it was about to happen to move, and our time ran out. The baby's time ran out. That is no excuse. That is the X we're solving for. This is the change that we made. Now, for me, the increase in cases of the 26%, what that says to me,
Is that just in Baton Rouge or across the state?
this one, I believe, was in the Baton Rouge area. But I'll let Mona tell me. This is what I want to say, though. I want you to help me. We all need to figure this out. How in the world are this many newborns being exposed to drugs? This is where I am requesting that we all have some new conversations about the number of kids. It also tells me that how pervasive drugs are, how the whole system needs to be right-sized to tackle the growing problem, how we need to move to figuring out why mothers and fathers are choosing drugs. They need treatment. They need other ways of coping with problems they're facing. They need resources to lessen the problems that they face that push them to drugs. We need opportunities that lead to basic needs being met and communities that thrive. That's what equals fewer drug-exposed babies. Whether they come to our attention or not, we need fewer drug-exposed babies, and we need fewer overwhelmed mothers and fathers and caretakers.
I totally agree, and I actually had someone to call me who works at a woman's hospital to share with me what they see.
Yeah.
And hopefully, as we are going through this process, we come up with something to begin to address that starting there when they are in the hospital with the mothers. I know we're fortunate to have the GRACE program, which is helping some of those ladies, but still, there's still so many of them who are falling through the crack, and they are needing help from before they leave the hospital. They are needing that help before they leave the hospital. But going back to this, I want to kind of stay on this a little bit because before I do that, you bring up a good point, and that's something else I'm going to really kind of focus on is the external help that we need, because government cannot fix this issue on its own. We cannot fix this issue on its own. It's a humongous problem that we have, and we're going to need a lot of folks to help wrap their arms around when they see things happening in the community, what they may be able to offer, like faith-based communities. I'm going to call them out in particularly, because if there's just one thing that they can do to help the agency or help someone who stepped up to be an adoptive parent or a foster parent, then all of that can make a difference. But going back to the workers, caseworker, supervisor, manager, area director. Now we're going to ask case assigner, and I'm missing it. What's the other new position?
This is the administrative. We call it, I think, an assistant AD, but
Okay.
basically she does administrative work.
Okay.
Now, the other parts that we're working on is bringing a multidisciplinary teams together, right? And so the nurses are helping as a part of a multidisciplinary team, right, that goes out and checks on the mother. That's also decreases the defensiveness of the mother, right, of the child, of that family, that you have a nurse coming to check on you as opposed to CPI, right? But then it also brings about the work that we're doing at the Family Justice Center to be co-housed with law enforcement, and both the deputies on the child welfare side spent time on the road this week and last week in these statewide meetings with law enforcement, and deputy assistant have been spending time with hospitals and to be a part of the solution. If we can tweak a little bit here, a little bit there, it's going to make a bigger difference if we find the right levers that are making the worst difference. And in this particular situation, in solving for X, we believe that not the new caseworkers, and we've been talking about this, we've had over 700 people over the past few weeks show up for jobs at DCFS. So notwithstanding how difficult it has been in the public, there's still these hearts that still want to be a part of the solution. Now, the 55 to 60% of those were coming to work on the other side of the house at family support, and we have a greater number of opportunities there. But that's a lot of people who are wanting to step forward. What happens when you first step forward, though, is that you're gonna have to have a lot of training. Mm-hmm. And Senator Barry, you gave me information about how potent fentanyl is.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, when we talk about the residue, what could the residue do? That brought up for me making sure that, do we have safety in our employees when they're going into these homes where there might be drugs, so that they're not accidentally touching something that could hurt them. That's something that we need to address. The fear associated with coming on to this job is important for us to address, right? When we as a world, a nation, a state looked around and realized that COVID was impacting everybody, we, reluctantly or not, decided that there was something that everybody needed to do, mandated or not mandated, where we're going to wear gloves, or we're going to put on our masks, or we were going to get. So our eyes have been open. We moved back to some normalcy, and I'm not getting into a public health issue, but I think that we have this other public health issue, and we all have to open up our eyes to figure out how can we help. Mm-hmm. So we need to fix the infrastructure within DCFS and shore it up so that we have enough people and that the positions are clear. This is another thing that came up, making sure that everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do. And I think one of the best things that came out of the KC meeting was that those in the field and those in programs were telling us, this is what I see and this is their ideas. And that was incredible, because we do go through that process where we add new things and we don't necessarily realize that we need to take something out. Mm-hmm. Because prescribing everything is not useful. So, for example, one of the things that we've added is something called CCDM, and I welcome Mona to the table to talk a little bit more about it. But CCDM actually shortcuts some of the regular practice that someone might have, where I'm a worker, I'm going to talk to my supervisor, I'm going to do all this legwork, then I got to get to my supervisor. My supervisor has several case workers to supervise, and right now, unfortunately, that supervisor might also have some cases that they're working. So it might take me a little while to get to my supervisor. So we now have a centralized gaggle of supervisors who are available if a worker has assessed a situation and think, okay, this house is assessed safe, this child is safe. They can call this gaggle of supervisors and find someone to talk it through with them so that there can be a decision made more quickly, and they're not waiting on their supervisor necessarily for that decision. That's an example of something in solving for X. Sometimes it's about reducing the number of cases that are coming in. Sometimes it's about making sure that the resources are available so that the families don't have to come into care, but they can stay in their home and have the amount resources. Sometimes it's about cutting out the number of steps it takes for a worker to be able to do their job. One of the best outcomes I heard from a manager, from a worker's perspective, is that they feel empowered. I have gone in, I have done an assessment, I have the ability to call somebody immediately and close that case so that I can, with a good heart and a good mind, move on to the next one. And it speaks to how prescribed a lot of our processes are, where the workers are, waiting and they can't move until they get to their supervisor, who could be over subscribed at that time.
Before she does, because I'm going back to this, so let me make my question a little bit more clear. So the people that we have here in line for Baton Rouge, the Baton Rouge area alone, so I believe that the case was under a supervisor, which should have then been to a manager and also an area director. So I know the supervisor's gone because she quit.
Yes.
That was part of the process. Are any of those people still there? That's because I believe in this. Everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
consequently, because at the time the secretary was Secretary Walters, the buck stops with her. But I'm trying to get to, and this is what I want to know. This is the absolute question I want to know for the Baton Rouge area, because
Yes,
Baton
ma'am.
Rouge is receiving a lot of help and support. Do we still have the same structure? Not necessarily, because you just told me about one thing that we've added, but do we still have the same people in place?
We have
Where
some
we
of the same people that have
failed.
come in to help,
Okay.
but the AD position is currently open, and we are looking for someone. We think we have a candidate for that. We've already had some interviews, and we think that there may be an opportunity to set 2 ADs in there because of just how big it is. But those are things that we're having some conversations about. The RA position is recently opened up, and we are actually having interviews soon to put a new RA there.
Okay.
I have looked around, and one of the assessments that we have done is that all the ADs and all the RAs across the state probably could retire already or would be walking out soon. And so that also gives us an opportunity to take those who have that level of experience that can be used in many different places and then get fresh water in the area for people who may be tired, who may need a break, who may need to move to another area, so that they can use their experience while we bring fresh perspective, fresh leadership, and then we also reset the culture in an office. We've got several tools that we're using right now to reset culture, and Mona and the other deputies, and I say Mona, she's sitting right here. We have 4 deputies right now working in child welfare. And the assistant secretary, Dr. Hodnett, who has decided to retire, will stay on as a WAE in 2023, and that's very good because she's got a lot of information that she will be able to and experience to keep as we need her to, and we're grateful for that. But several of all the deputies are working towards making sure that working with Casey and outside of Casey, because we've been working with Casey for a long time, but this is a new approach of working with Casey, that we will be able to identify an actual strategy that is not just immediate and it's not just short term, but it is long term. And so working specifically with Miss Evelyn Jenkins, who couldn't be here today, as the chief deputy, she has been working specifically looking at our plans going forward with so many people being able to retire.
I heard you very loud and clearly. You answered that. You did a very good job in answering that question. And so I hear you. So I know some people have been moved, sounds like. Because at the end of the day, if we keep allowing what has been, we will keep getting what we've always gotten.
That's correct.
And so I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to know that there's been some changes in that arena, so that I would feel a little bit more comfortable in knowing that, because previously that did not work, even with all the safeguards and measures that we had in place. I do believe this with my whole heart. I believe that more than 90% of the people that work in that office are committed to that job. I honestly believe that they don't do it for the pay because it's not enough money. They do it because they are committed to the welfare and the well-being of children and families. I believe that. But we still have an element where sometimes people just become burnt out, overworked, or sometimes just a little bit lethargic, because you've been there too long.
Maybe so.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm gonna go to Senator Jackson, and we'll allow you, Miss Michelle, after she asks her questions, to present.
Thank
Jackson.
you. Good morning, Madam
morning.
Secretary. I want to echo this. Any call made for our immediate past secretary to relieve herself of the position was not a call of, and I want to say that publicly, out of any nefarious or ugliness. It was based on the current events that are happening. Whether when you're in leadership, your hands are on the incident or not, after so many incidents, it becomes apparent that new leadership, is needed. But I do want to thank her for her years of service. I knew her heart for this job and all that she did for this department, and I don't want that to go unnoticed, as she has, resigned this position. I don't think the resignation was a failure of heart or what she was attempting to do, but at some point, some that work under you have a continuous practice, and unfortunately, it comes and the buck stops with leadership. But she did give many years of service and very passionate service to the children of Louisiana. Just came to a point that some that were working under her, as we're seeing, were not doing their part. It's
Thank you, Senator
unfortunate,
Jackson.
but when we accept leadership roles, we are also responsible for those who work under us. But I don't think that it reflected on her and her heart and her hard work. Sometimes I tend to call it some ugly cancer that hits your organization. And after that, regardless of how strong you stand in leadership, there are those who will not get back in line with the purpose and the goal and what your heart is in leadership. And so I understand and understood her heart and still do. I think it's a great loss to Louisiana. But however, moving on is necessary when these incidents have occurred. But I did not want that to go unnoticed, her many years of service to this organization. And sometimes people leave because they do something wrong. But sometimes leaders leave because those in the organization continue not to follow leadership. This is a case where she did nothing wrong in and of herself, but there were just those who, I guess, decided, maybe because of burnout or whatever, not to follow the leadership's plan. And I wanted that to not go unacknowledged today. So with that being said, there is still an issue at hand.
Yes, ma'am.
That issue has reoccurred despite how many times this agency has hit the news, despite how many times that news has been of deaths to children, rape to children. I've come down for this interim committee more than I've come down for any other interim committee besides joint budget, which meets monthly, sometimes bi-monthly. And there is a growing concern for this department because you take care of our most vulnerable children who can't speak for themselves. And I still hadn't figured out the breakdown. I thought we left here with a really good plan in our last meeting. And I didn't realize that plan wasn't fully implemented until Monday. Because I think you just testified that someone was hired this Monday to...
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what was that position?
The case assigner.
Okay, so tell me about the case assigner. Is that case assigner responsible for every office across the state?
So I'm gonna punt a little bit over here to Mona, who actually is the deputy assistant secretary over the field, all of Louisiana. Mona.
Hey, Mona Michelli, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Child Welfare Programs and Field Operations. So the case assigner role is something originally that started in New Orleans several months ago, probably close to a year ago. And so when we first started looking at this, we had some staff that temporarily came in as part of the strike team. And one of those roles that we filled at that time was of the case assigner. And so what has happened is, because of the success of that in Baton Rouge, we are implementing someone on a permanent basis who did start on Monday from a previous role that she had with the agency. It is part of the case assigner is part of a larger model that we're implementing as part of the 7 strategies, which is a child protection model. This case assigner is going to relocate the office to where she will be housed at the Family Justice Center on Government Street, where we will house certain staff, as well as we will be co-housed with law enforcement officers. This person, the case assigner, will not just assign cases, but will also have a closer eye, given her experience of, wait, this case may be a good case to identify for that may need a CAC. So let me flag this one. This one is maybe a more referral to law enforcement, and we need to do a joint investigation. Let's pull that together. So it's more not just making sure the cases are assigned, but also really taking a closer look at those cases.
So would she assign every case that comes in?
In Baton Rouge, yes, except for, so this is a Baton Rouge position, and it is looking at, but it's the East Baton Rouge Parish. Then we are requesting
How
positions.
many TOs do you have open? And I don't mean to interrupt you. How many TOs do you have remaining open right now for this budget year?
Oh, I just pulled that up.
411.
Wait a second. I have a narrative about this. Let me pull it real quick. So right now we're looking at our vacant TO in a more comprehensive manner, because some of the 411 are people's B-owned positions, meaning they're working on a project, but that position that's shown as vacant is theirs. It's a property
It's theirs.
right.
I get that.
Right?
They've been transferred to
Right.
an immediate need. So
So if I move out the B-owned, the true vacancies we have are 334. There are 18 in executive and admin offices, 130 in child welfare, and 186 in family support.
So my question is going to be, because I don't purport to know everything about your organization. This case assigner, you may have had some high profile cases in Baton Rouge recently, but we're hearing from DCFS workers all over the state that they are overworked, that they're above the national caseload right now. So the first question I'm going to have is, why can't we have a case assigner in every office?
Actually, that is part of the budget request, is that there is one for every single region, including, another part of that is going to be, and moving forward, another part of that is, you talked about our staff being overworked. One thing that we also want to implement is we have a position called a team specialist. And that is somewhat of a caseworker assistant who does those paraprofessional activities for staff. We are looking to implement one of those in every single unit across the state to support the staff. That's called a teaming specialist.
Okay, let's go back to case assigners. You said that's a part of your budget request, but we have respectfully some positions open. And I understand that you're going to revamp your budget for this upcoming, but I'm saying the current year we're in, what holds you back right now from hiring case assigners for every office?
Actually, nothing.
Okay.
And this is some of the discussions we've been having this week. Now, we might have to use a job appointment to do it as opposed to a TO. And the reason is, is that right now, based on the work that we've been doing on the 6 hiring fairs, with the 7th that occurred this week, that I may or may not have, we have made 252 conditional offers of employment that are working their way through the system, which it takes about 252, 110 child welfare and 142 in family support.
So that's great, because that's taking some of the caseload off of those who are there.
Right.
So
we
on
have
case assigner, whether we have to use a TO or an
job
appointment,
That's right.
my request is that we don't wait to the next budgetary year.
Mine too.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That we get that
made
done.
that this week to make sure that everybody who was in the room on Wednesday understood that you can use a job appointment to get to the structure that you need.
With all deliberate speed.
With all deliberate speed, which includes speed dial for Byron Decato at civil service, where we have to, because the process, it takes a little while to add a new thing in a new region. And so we are struggling a little bit.
You are here to
with
help if
Yes,
you're
they are
facing
great.
Okay.
They've been great. And while I have the attention of the room about people being great, let me just say this. The hiring fairs are no small feat. Louisiana Workforce Commission, Secretary Cato has been amazing with bringing things to the table. Civil Service, Office of Technology Services. We've met at community colleges, we've met at hotels, we've met at other state agencies to make this happen. The library in Baton Rouge. And so the commissioner's office has given us 2 HR people to work the hiring fairs, et cetera. And so what might have taken 4 months at some point is taken us 3 to 4 weeks right now. And that's why we call them hiring fairs and not job fairs, because it was a different in intent. It would not have come about were it not for the weekly and sometimes bi-weekly meetings that we're having with civil service, with the commissioner's office, with the chief of staff, with Tina V in the governor's office to help us make sure that we are really bird dogging this. The other side of that, though, is when we then onboard them. DCFS is in the middle of changing out with OTS our laptops, so it takes a little longer to get a laptop assigned and things like that. But there is all hands on deck on both the hiring and the onboarding of the employees to get to where we need to get to. But this work with Casey, I believe, will be some expedient work to help us to see, is there something else that we need to do with the structure? And that's what I mean, like, if we set this structure up some time ago where there's, when we were downsizing, right? Worker, supervisor, right on up. And then we got rid of admin, and we, after a while, we rolled out, there's very few persons that are helping with transportation and the admin side. This is the work that they've done, is to identify we need to add these other pieces back in, but not like we used to, because it's a new set of circumstances. We used to have 15% of the cases that were super complex. Every case that comes in is super complex right now, it seems, especially with the drugs. And so the Casey work, along with all of the leaders, and is going to help us to determine, is there a new best practice that's out there? Yes, go ahead.
Honor, so you're going to take care of that at each regional office, right? And then who at your level, executive level, is going to manage those case assigners?
The
Who's
case
going to
assigners
receive their reports? Because that was something we talked about before, having one central person that could work with each regional office to get a report on, how many, and Senator Barrow is very well versed in the language of the 24-hour, what do they call it, when there's a 24-hour case? Tier one
cases.
Tier 2.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we now, who do we have, once you hire those case assigners at each regional office, who's going to receive their daily report on tier 1, tier 2? Because see, the buck, and we've learned that with the last secretary, is going to stop at the executive level. So I think we really need some communication between those daily communication between us case assigners and someone in your office, whether you have to create that position or not, because we're losing children and we need to look at that. And I know that everyone sitting behind you and everyone else is overworked. So to put it on someone who's currently there probably would be insufficient, because we call you over here during session several times, right? And your executive team comes with you. So who can and what position can we create to have one person whose job is at the executive level to receive those reports daily, to track them, to look at them, to communicate with the case assigners and make sure they are not, and if they're out sick, That was the issue, I understand, with this last case. To know that there's a case assigner out sick and to figure out where that case report is. Basically, I am suggesting you need someone at the executive level whose sole job is to work with those case assigners, receive daily reports, and be able to report back to you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Your concern is noted, and we will be filling the assistant secretary, who will be the person that will have to get
Now, the
that.
assistant secretary is over here with you a lot. Session.
Yes, ma'am.
And so,
And
just
that's the
proceed.
deputy. That would be Mona's job to
Right.
make sure that we got that. But listen, when
But
the buck
I
stops,
think that
Yep.
nobody, because I'm going to revisit this.
Yes,
Everyone
ma'am.
that you're naming is called over here several times during session.
yes, ma'am.
And so my suggestion is that we hire someone who solely works with those case assigners. And if they hand a thorough report to you and your secretaries and your undersecretary, your deputy secretary, so you know what's going on. Everyone I'm looking at here, jobs are full. And I think we keep putting Band-Aids where stitches should be.
Thank you.
We keep putting new responsibilities on employees who are extremely already busy. But tracking of cases seems to be a major issue. I don't think it's wasteful to put someone at the executive level that's communicating with those case assigners daily and receiving daily reports and is in the office to monitor those daily reports. Whether the case assigner is out sick, Madam Secretary, Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary is over here answering questions.
Senator Jackson received.
You see what I'm saying? Okay, good. Because I think the system, we've tried everything. Now we have to double down.
Thank you.
And that's really my request. And I understand that at some point that's going to come to be a budgetary matter and an adding of TOs if you do it by appointment, because we can't just leave these TOs to be those without adding back your TOs to every office because you're overworked. But overworked is not an excuse when we're losing children. So we have to get to a point where we're realistic about how we're restructuring. And that's my only ask. And I know you say, well, we come to the legislature, and I'm going to go back to this because no, seriously, and you guys have not properly funded us at times, and we haven't, and we have some responsibility, and we can't sit here today and act like the responsibility falls just on the department. My understanding is when I first came in the House, and I don't carry those numbers with me, but I know they're absorbent. We did more with less. And you lost how many positions? I mean, it's a joke. We did less with less. It's coming up now. How many positions did you lose when we were doing more with less, supposedly?
As an undersecretary under Blanco, our budget had 5,200 employees. We currently have 3,400 TO.
Has your caseload went up since the Blanco years?
The caseload has gone up. And Eric might be telling me that the TO went up a little bit because we've added some
about to go
new
there, too.
bodies of work that we've added TO.
Trafficking,
with
which was much needed, which
Right.
we advocated
Absolutely.
for, and that was much needed.
Much
we saw
needed.
what was happening, and so
Extended foster care.
So my concern is this, and I say this every time we call you before us, because the buck's going to stop with you, or whoever becomes permanent, right? We never address it. We never address it. We go in the media, we scream at the department, which is rightfully so. You accepted these positions, right? But we never address the fact that you are now currently at how many employees?
You want to give me the real number, Eric?
TOs wise,
3,600.
3,600. And during the Blanco years, before we started doing more with less,
5,200.
we had 5,200. And now you have a higher caseload, which means you're dealing with more children, but you're under I can do the quick math.
So, of course, 500 of those were program areas that moved to other agencies.
Okay, so you're under 1,600. We're going to deduct 500. So you're at 1,100 that still should have been with you. And that was under the Blanco caseload numbers. not under the current caseload numbers. We haven't, that 1,100 is a flat number without adding the new, without adding the percentage of new cases to match the workers needed. And I'm going to keep screaming that because everybody seems that they won't ignore it. Kids are still passing away. Kids are still being raped. Kids are still being put in harm's way. And everyone wants to ignore the fact that you're 1,100 down before you account for any increases in cases since Blanco. But we're putting children first, and that to me becomes very hilarious. That no one wants to address the fact that you are 1,100 plus, and I say plus because of the growth of cases down in TOs. That you're 1,100 plus down in budgetary, your budget for staff with growing cases. And I believe in solving it all if we say we put children first. I believe that at some point we make a lot of tough decisions on budgets every day, but tough decisions can amount to kids being harmed and losing their life. And I'm going to keep on addressing that part of it. Now, I am saying the responsibility of what happened here and here was a result of not following through fast enough from what was supposed to be implemented. Now that is on you. What's on us is the fact that we know you're 1,100 plus down, and we fail to address it every year. Higher education was cut tremendously during that time, and we've been able to adjust that. The MFP was flat funded at that time, and we've been able to advocate for that. Teachers' pay raises were non-existent, and we've been able to advocate and take care of that. I can go on and on. Mental health services was cut severely. It still hasn't been restored, but we've been making gains. We've made gains in every area where we've cut, where Louisiana saw its constituents suffer, but in the area of your TOs. But we're screaming every week, every month we bring you, every 3 or 4 months. But former Madam Secretary continued to talk about that in every committee she went in. And that's no excuse for what's happened. Let me be very, very clear. I love all you guys, but it is seriously no excuse for what happened. Because when you decide to stay and do the work of 10 horsemen by yourself, if that's the case. Mm-hmm. But we have some responsibility that former Madam Secretary kept talking about, kept pleading for. And people say, well, you know what? Sometimes the governor didn't put it in his budget. Well, the governor sends a lot of budgets over here that we adjust for the greater good of our constituency. And so I don't even want to really hear that as an excuse. The governor has never fully gotten, whether it was Jindal, I guess he did sometimes, or Edwards or Blanco, none of them have ever fully gotten the budget they requested without us tweaking it. That's the legislator's job, to appropriate where we see fit, to tweak budgets where we see fit. My suggestion to my colleagues, myself, and others is that we get serious about those 1,100 positions, even if we can't restore them all, that we begin to restore them. Because, media clips and speeches doesn't do it when kids are hurting. If we're serious about it, we need to be serious about holding you accountable, but we need to be serious about holding ourselves accountable about the TO positions that have been gone while cases increase. If we're talking about a national average, the goal here should be to get below the national average in how many cases your caseworkers work, because for some reason it seems like our situation is more dire. It goes to the point where you talked about, you said it, it is a reality that kids are being exposed to more drugs than ever, while we're having debates every day in this legislature about legalizing drugs. I, for one, have held up on supporting any of that, because we don't have it under control for our children. And I'm not saying that one day I will not support it, but I cannot support things like that when we're seeing kids get a hold of drugs every day. And what's not deadly to me, you, senators, or anyone else that's grown can be deadly to a child. We are facing an epidemic of children in homes getting the hold to things. We had a junior high in my district where a kid brought some Rice Krispie treats, the little colorful Rice Krispie treats, to school. He handed them out to 3 other children, not knowing that they were laced with fentanyl. Is that right, fentanyl? Yeah, that's what we're... And all of them collapsed at school. And so I can't continue a conversation about legalizing drugs until we get a handle of what's already been introduced in our homes. And before we legalize anything, we have to get to the point where adults are responsible for what they're handling, because kids can't bear the responsibility of what's happening. Now, those are my thoughts on this. And I want to be real clear about where you share in the responsibility. But I'd be derelict in my duties as an elected official if I didn't recognize that Madam Secretary, the former Madam Secretary, came to this committee, Health and Welfare, Budget Committee, everywhere she went, screaming for 7 years about the loss in TOs that were never restored. Now, I really want to see if this legislature is going to be serious this year about children. Because if we're serious about children, we'll recognize the cry of the former secretary who left under dire circumstances. Now, that was her responsibility. She came before the committee and told us what she would do, and it did not happen fully. And so she had to take her own responsibility and resign. Question is, when will the legislature take its responsibility and give you the TOs you need to work with? And people say, well, they have so many TOs that have been unfilled. You have 110 in the process, 142 in the process. During that time of unfilled TOs was COVID. Many were working from home. Children were not in school. Now you have to make up just like schools have made up. I'm very happy to see our SPS scores, school performance scores, going up. We're finally back at pre-COVID, but that didn't happen without funding, without after-school tutorial programs, without a whole lot of federal funding that came down to address what had happened. But kids have been in homes unchecked, and that was no fault of yours on that. COVID just was what it was. But I am advocating for a reasonable restoration of those TOs, and that can only come from you. And I know the governor is your boss, and I'm hoping to see a budget that reflects the restoration reasonably of some of those TOs, if not all, if we can't afford it. My last question is this. Did this state turn down Family First Act money that would have provided for unification? Because that's what's going around, unification of families that would have helped with that and would have helped with things like drug treatment. Tell me about this Families First Act money that we're getting texts and emails that we supposedly turned down. And if we did, the next question is why?
Good afternoon, I guess. At this
Afternoon.
point. Eric Horrent, Undersecretary. We did opt in the Family First Act in, I think, October 2020, 2019. So the way it works is we have transition dollars right now, around 8 million for 5-year period that we can use to implement.
Okay, so, I like a direct answer before we start explaining. Did we accept all the Family
Yes,
First
yes,
Act money that was
yes.
offered to us?
Yes.
Okay,
That's
good.
what I was to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the money that was available. We took it, we use it to implement 2 evidence-based projects right now. So the way Family First work, really, it's a federal match.
Okay.
So we're implementing evidence-based project and programs, and we're able to draw down a 50% match. So for the implementation, we had $8 million of 100% federal fund that we took.
So we didn't leave any on the table because we didn't have the state match.
No.
Okay.
We are in our budget request for next year requesting, I think, around $4 million of state general fund. Until now, we have been using this transition fund. That's what was set up to actually establish these programs. Once we run out of that in 24, we're gonna need state general fund. So we haven't reached that point yet. That would
Okay.
be in 2024.
And so what are we doing with the Family First Act money?
So,
You want Mona to talk about it?
yeah, Mona can do it.
We'll tag team this one. So there's 2 evidence-based services through Families First, and the state has submitted their Family First Prevention Act plan, the state plan, to our federal partners. So the 2 services are Intercept, which is an intensive home-based services that are geared towards older youth and preventing those youth from entering foster care. Child First is the second evidence-based program, and that is a program that is designed more geared for younger children that we intend to use for like more of our substance-exposed newborns and those at-risk youth, the younger children. Both of them are in the process of being developed and piloted in different areas. And so Intercept is already in certain areas of the state, and we are expediting the implementation of that program as well in the Baton Rouge area.
So I keep hearing that if a child is exposed to marijuana, it's more likely than not, if they're exposed to marijuana, it's more likely than not that they will remain in the home. Is that correct? By a court, and I know you don't make the final decision.
Right. So, DC by law, if a child tests positive for marijuana that is used in an unlawful manner, that is to be reported by the hospital to DCFS. We do investigate. But remember, just like the everything behind the Family First Prevention Act is to prevent children from entering care when safely able to do so.
Right.
And so that is our goal. If we are able to provide services to prevent a child from entering care when safely able to do so, that is what we want to do.
So my question is that are they more likely to remain in the home when they've been exposed to marijuana? In your professional experience,
more likely than not, yes, that is correct. But I do not have specific data on that.
My answer is why? Because to me, a child exposed to a drug is a child exposed to a drug, and that was my whole conversation about legalizing drugs before we have a handle on the responsibility of adults around children with them. Why is that the case? And why is an exposure of a child to marijuana taken less seriously?
We do not take it less seriously. It is not about the drug, it is about the safety of a child. How does the substance use impact the parenting of that child and that parent's ability to keep that child safe? That's what we have to base whenever we approach a judge, we have to approach a judge with information that the child is at imminent risk of harm or danger. That child, without court intervention, would be seriously at risk of being abused or neglected. So, that's what's required. That's the standard of proof, and that's what's required in the law.
I just wonder, because it seems like, and that's what a lot of medical professionals are telling us, that the cases that are reported with children being exposed to other drugs, you follow those cases, the child is more likely to be taken out the home. But cases reported when children have been exposed to marijuana, they're more likely to remain in the home.
I mean, there are several factors that we have to consider. We have to consider history. We have to consider the type of use, how it affects their daily functioning, substance abuse assessments, mental health. It's a combination of factors. It's not a matter of this drug results in this finding. It has to be, each case is different and requires a different assessment. But it's based on the safety of a child. We frequently tell our staff, it's not about the drug, it's about what the circumstances are around it.
I understand. Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. I have no further questions. I look forward to working with you. Look forward to the implementation of the suggestions made today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Before I go to Senator Mizell, I would take it, Eric, that you've already have been preparing the budget to submit to the governor.
Absolutely.
Prior to all of this happening. Has anything changed in terms of what the requests were initially as opposed to what they may be now?
No, but they will. Because the budget was due October 31st, which is when we were implementing the changes, what we're going to do is we're going to make amendment to our budget request. You know, we have a lot of things
Okay.
in place that are contract related. I cannot make a request without knowing how much money, which means of financing, and so on. So we talked to the administration about it. We submitted a budget that has position because the need for the position existed before the situation we had here. So that's in the budget. But requests specifically addressing the stabilization of the child welfare program that have been in place in the last couple of months, 3 months, that's going to be put into an amendment to our request.
And so you're in the process of working that out now?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to see those amendments that you guys will be submitting. Okay, Senator Mizell.
Thank you, Madam
Sorry.
Chairman. Madam Acting Secretary, I'm going back to you, okay? I would love you to share with us those 7 strategies. You referenced them, and maybe you'd mentioned them earlier when I was in the side room and I didn't hear it, but I'd love to see that. What I have noticed is that, you know, with the concerns going on, primarily centered in Baton Rouge, is that we have other metropolitan areas that I don't see any similar situations taking place. And actually, I spoke to a regional, I don't know the title.
Regional administrator, maybe?
Yeah, you know, she's got the whole area. And I asked her, what do you all do so that at the point where the cases are assigned, so you're going to have someone named a case assigner, and I think, Mona, you and I, we had another meeting before. What I really want to see, and maybe you're going to have a name for it, and maybe it's in this, is who follows up to find out. It's one thing, we can assign cases all day long. But the assurance that I wanted, and that was the whole priority 1, priority 2, 24-hour thing, is that, okay, somebody's within 24 hours saying, so-and-so's out, who's going to send somebody to that child? And that, I don't care about all the titles or any of that, because this regional person said, she said, oh, I call myself, you know, I call them myself. So is there no set protocol in every region where there's an expectation that these are the steps that are going to happen? And this is, you know, the way we're going to be held accountable. Tell me if that's how it works.
Yes.
Okay.
There will need to be changes made. And we've actually talked about even practice changes. And this is where I believe the Casey Help is going to be so helpful. Because as we look at the number of cases, you know, cases seem to ebb and flow. Like they go up, they go down. We're not experiencing down
Yeah.
right now. And so, you know, we're going to have to prepare for the continued up until there's some major changes throughout the community
Right.
that prevents things like drugs. And so in our recent review of this, and this is where we're relying on Casey to come back with evidence-based practices on the hiring and human resource side. What is the structure should be? Should there be a first contact team who the only thing they do is they go out and make first contact with the babies? I see the children, and then we move it on to the caseworkers to continue it so that we can make sure that we're putting eyes on every child. That's not the current practice. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Let me just say that, because, you know, one of the things that we did actually last Wednesday in a 3.5-hour meeting, I think it was Wednesday, was track that down. Then we also have maybe some opportunities in technology that will make that a little bit easier for the caseworkers who are out to get information back to say exactly what happened a little bit sooner. A call I made to Dickie Howes, our CIO at OTS on Friday when everybody was supposed to be off, and he was at lunch and took the call, yielded a team on the ground on Monday to take care of some low-hanging fruit that we believe can be added to our access system to help with that, and Mona is working with that. So you are right. That is my assessment. We're working on that. I want to be able to come back and tell you let me tell you what we've done to make sure that both what you and Senator Jackson has done seems to be in lockstep. It's like the same concern. It's the same concern I have. It's the same concern that everybody has. But I think there's, we talk about evidence-based practices, and in child welfare, you need them. But there's also some evidence-based practices in human resource structure and development. And I'm getting a PhD in that right now. Like, I'm in a PhD program, and I've been studying leadership and human resource development in the last 18 months to be able to bring to bear some more resources and thinking through our structure, how we set things up, how we help people understand that you're doing a good job, what the research shows in that area too. And that falls into this lockstep. So I think with Casey bringing that to the table with us, and we'll be meeting with them next week again. I believe that we're going to be able to show you something that actually gets to the heart of what happened with these babies, and be able to show you this is what we have done, or this is what we're working with civil service to bring about.
But I want to say, you have people in regions who are already doing it.
They are.
They're doing it. I mean, they found a way to do it. They didn't have to, because, even a layperson looking at it, there's got to be a follow-up. I mean,
and there's some differences, right, in the regions. And that's where we get to when I was talking to Senator Barrow, saying maybe we need 2 ADs in the larger regions where there's so much activity.
Right.
Because the AD is really, and the RAs, they're really kind of held in with a lot of administrative tasks, when we also really need them to making decisions, because usually they're the ones with the most experience on decision-making capacity as well, right? And so some of the newer people coming into the system, they may not have an MSW, they may not be licensed, but they're good and they're learning, but they may not be able to make those decisions. And so you're right on track, and we're learning from them. And so that's what the beauty of having all the ADs and RAs in one room, and for us to think about this all together. And mind you, that doesn't just happen on the Wednesday meeting that we have with Casey. The leadership absolutely learns from what's going on in each region and pulls that up. The crisis is definitely lending itself to less than best practice all across. But what I appreciated from the work that I have done in reviewing is that the leadership in child welfare is paying special attention to all of the other areas, so that if we are borrowing somebody for a short period of time, it is a short period of time, and we're not putting them in the same situation that Baton Rouge has found itself in. However, I will say that I had a conversation with the AD in New Orleans, and this uptick that came in really caused them to lose some people, because the caseload, she said, I was looking at my dashboard. I had 2 caseworkers that were like overly heavy, right? And then we had this change in policy, and it went to 15 caseworkers that were in red, and then 3 of them left because the burden was so high. Casey's going to work with us to make sure that, are we opening the door? Is our assessment still good, right? Do we need to change our assessment at all for those kids that are coming in, the allegations that are coming in? Do we continue to use the tools the same way? Or is there evidence that shows us that even the reporting tools should be different? For example, a lot of the reports, for example, that come in from the portal lack sufficient information. So then you got a worker calling back, trying to find somebody to get more information, for example. And so, Senator Mizell, your questions are right on their mind. I believe this is what we have in our scope. And I believe that the work that we have done will yield finding the tools that are working, not just in one area, but also that are working to change systems in other states and pull them in.
Right. And I have another meeting that started at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for stepping up. I know it was awkward. Nobody wanted it to work out the way it worked out, but we all support DCFS. I want to make sure you all have no doubt I'm not looking back 7 years. I had no role in that. But we're here. You all do a job that's incredibly important to all of us. You know, we just talked about juvenile justice. We want to have a quality of life for our children from birth all the way through. And I think everybody that is here and everybody in this building is with you to succeed. So please just, no, I just want you to know that before
Absolutely.
I have
Thank
to
you.
leave and go to civic education.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Senator Hewitt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So it's been a kind of a long afternoon, and there's been a lot of really great discussion. I also want to add my voice and let you know that we are all here because we do believe in DCFS, and we want to do our part in supporting what you do. And the people who work for DCFS, I mean, let me give you guys a little bit of a shout out. It takes a special person to work in that role, and the things that you all see every day and the things that you experience are heart-wrenching. And I myself could never do that job. And so to do it day after day after day after day because you care, about children and families is inspiring to me. And so I want you to know that we appreciate what you do. I just can't even imagine how difficult a job it is. And what we have been reading about in the newspaper, has been horrific. It's tragic. And, we can talk about how aggravated we are because the potholes aren't getting fixed, but it's a totally different conversation when children are dying. And, so it is one of the most important challenges, I think, facing our state. And I'm not qualified to tell you how to fix it. You all are in the trenches every single day, and you're working this issue, and we're kind of here on the fringes. We're primarily appropriators, but I would like to ask a couple of questions, kind of in terms of process and how you manage the business of DCFS. And I'm saying you, and I acknowledge that you're new in this role, but you've been serving in an executive, leadership position. Tell me, what data do you look at every day, or every week, or every month to assess how well we're doing? There ought to be metrics that you're looking at every day, every week, every month, where you say, okay, things are going great. Or you may say, warning signs, right? This is not good. We're not on a good track. Something with a warning. Or maybe it's, oh my God, it's an emergency. And so there's leading indicators, of those sorts of things. And the outcomes, of course, are awful, and so it's really important to me, in my way of looking at it, especially with this kind of a business, that you have ways of looking at data on a regular basis to assess that. So you know when to ask for help, when to scream emergency, when things are going well, and so when they're not, you can get the help. It's not just an annual affair. You can get the help that you need, whether it's from the legislature or, other resources at your disposal. So tell me a little bit about the data and what you look at.
Thank you. Senator Hewitt, one of the things I want from Casey is to make sure that I have the right dashboard going forward as the secretary. I can't speak to exactly what a former secretary looked at on a daily basis, but I know that, she had monthly meetings and we had weekly meetings to make a space for the assistant secretaries to wrangle and say there's a problem. Marquita and I work so well together because we're very different. We would say, the yin and the yang, so to speak. And so I can't speak for what Marquita looked at. I can tell you that I'm going to be looking at a lot of things a little bit differently, and we'll be building some dashboards to make sure that I can personally see what's happening across the board. Mona can talk a little bit more about what she sees at her level, and I think that that's one of the things that I want to make sure to change, is that it's not just the assistant secretary that knows exactly what's going on, but that the data is actually rolling all the way up to me to be able to ascertain that question: how are the children doing? How are the employees doing? And it comes all the way up to the secretary. So we'll be a little bit different maybe than it was when Renda had her numbers and Shavana had her numbers, so to speak, for the assistant secretaries. But I don't have them right now. And so that's one of the things that will be coming maybe in week 2. Week 1 has been super busy, but I don't have a dashboard yet. And it could be just getting the right credentials. But Mona, you want to talk about the data?
Yes. And first off, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your support of our staff. It is a really hard job. And I think the more that our staff can hear that they're valued and appreciated for the hard work they do, it's really appreciated. So thank you. And I do want to start out with some numbers, just to understand the context of where we're at right now as well. There has been today, the number of children in foster care, we have 78% more children in foster care than we did on this day 2 years ago. That reflects the amount of staff that we need, and not just positions, but we need people. And that's where we need as much support as we can get, is to bring people to this work. It is a difficult job, and we are struggling with bringing people on and bringing the right people on.
And when you talk about these people, you're talking about foster care parents?
No, we are talking about staff. We are talking about investigators
Parents
and
too.
foster care workers and foster parents as well.
Yeah.
We need as many people to join our fight that we can get, because we have a long way to go.
So those would be things you would measure, right? I mean, it might
Yes.
be a good thing that your numbers are going up in foster care. It means that there's less children at risk, maybe, if the foster care situation is better than the family environment that they were removed from.
Right. Yeah.
We do have the data. I want to make sure that we can talk about it, and Mona's going to keep talking about it. It's not that we don't have it and we're not measuring it.
Yeah.
It's just that I don't have access to it yet.
And we do.
Directly,
We have
yeah.
a dashboard that is accessible for all levels within child welfare. And on that dashboard, there's a plethora of data available for foster care, ranging from which foster care cases are open, which foster care children are needing medical exams, dental exams, how long they've been in care, how long, if their placements need updating in the system. The same thing with CPS. There's reports on contacts, whether they have been documented or not documented, what cases are open, what cases are needing to be closed because they're nearing that time frame. We have a plethora of data. Supervisors have access to it. Managers have access to it. We have access to it. We use those tools every day. One thing that we did on a management level in state office is approximately a year ago, we implemented what's called a monthly regional report. And so what we did was, so much data is out there, but we want to know each program area, identify what are the key performance factors that we need to measure, and identify those and have the region report back, at least on a monthly basis, of where are we with that standard, and what's being done to be able to increase it, address it, or how are we doing? Let's recognize the staff for that they are doing a good job. So data, we have an entire data unit. They are our rock stars who really do help us on a daily basis, not only to look at different ways that we can track the data, but how we can evaluate it to be able to determine next steps. So.
And that's good to hear. And I'm not surprised that you do have lots of data. And so I guess I am a big believer in dashboards,
Yeah.
right? Red, yellow, green, and measure things that change behavior, that drive action. so that you can, again, ask for help when you need it, sound the alarms when you need to. And then the data is very helpful. When you come to the legislature, you've got it all there, right, to make your case. What happens if we don't do X, or what can we accomplish if we do Y? And it helps get, it's a limited amount of dollars, right? And so you're competing for lots of dollars. And what I told Marquetta many times is she's got the biggest heart in the building, right? So she leads with her heart, but not the personalities of those of you that work in DCFS are kind of more heart people than head people, right? You're not the X's and O's people necessarily. You lead with your heart. Chip's smiling. You've been in my office, Chip. We've talked about this many times. So, work on the X's and O's a little bit would be my advice. And I'm not trying to desensitize this at all, because it is a very emotional issue and just a really important thing to all of us. Let me ask you about root cause. Okay, so there needs to be like a root cause analysis when you have tragedies. You asked about how are these children getting drugs? I don't know. But there's a root cause analysis that you can do to sort of kind of drill into that. And so that if you can keep the drugs out of the hands of the mamas and the dads, maybe then the babies don't get the drugs. I don't know. But, there's a root cause process, right? And then you find a way to attack that so that you're saving lives. So talk to me about kind of your process on root cause analysis.
I'll start with something in Louisiana that is already existing. It's the Child Death Review Panel through the Louisiana Department of Health. So for children who are under a certain age that die of unexpected reasons, there are local reviews to look at what are the causes? What can we do to look at where can we prevent this? And then there's the state level. As a matter of fact, there is a state level meeting coming up, I believe, on December 6th. And I've already charged our CPS program manager to take this issue to them on December 6th and ask, what can we do as a state to look at preventative efforts with regards to the fentanyl use? So that's one thing that we can do. We also need to look at every day, what can we do differently? I know that Secretary Ricks also talked about just this week that she wanted to do a root cause analysis of what are the issues with child welfare and underlying causes of abuse, and had talked about that, doing that with Casey.
Yep.
So if you wanted to add to that.
Yep. That's it. It's one of the very specific requests we made of Casey just this week, was to assist us with looking at root cause analysis for several of the cases, and be able to put that out from an outsider's perspective, looking in, not just internal, even to state agencies, but to run that down so that we can have that data from a third party as well.
Okay. And then when you talk about I think you said a 20-something% increase in cases, so why do we have caseloads increasing, or number of cases increasing? Why does it seem to be happening more in Baton Rouge than in other urban areas? Senator Mizell asked that question. What are some of your preliminary thoughts about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is where the root cause analysis is actually going to help us a lot. What is going on in those particular communities when we map where the cases are coming from, what else is happening in that community, and there's some predictive analytics that can also help us to understand, right? What is going on? Are there an increased number of prescriptions in that particular area as opposed to another? Louisiana is very high on the overdose deaths for fentanyl right now. I think number 6 in the nation, maybe. And so it definitely gets outside of us to figure it out. It becomes a public health issue, but that's where our partners are so important, at LDH and otherwise. But Casey, I'm hoping, will help us to bring in national perspective and some other professionals to help us dig into that. But we have some tools now in our toolkit, including using the Blanco Policy Center to help us figure out some things like that. But then also the mapping now. It used to take almost like an act of Congress to get all your data mapped in one particular space so that you can go in and take a look at it. One of the other drivers that we have right now to try to get us in prevention and understand what's going on in the community is this My Community Cares, which is a program that we're running where we have data that shows that certain communities are lending an environment or an environment that are sending more kids into our care. And so My Community Care started in, I think, 6 parishes or 5 areas. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, part of it. It was part of our federal program improvement plan, and so it started in 3 and kind of lended itself to another one, added 4. But now, as part of our redesigned family resource centers that are going into effect or went into effect on October 1st, every region either has or will have a My Community Cares partnership. And so it's more of a grassroots effort to go more upstream in prevention of child abuse and entry into our system. So it really is taking hold across Louisiana and doing well. I do have to say, though, that it isn't limited to Baton Rouge. It's a statewide issue that we're seeing just across the state. I can say if you look at, we talk about data as compared the month of June to the month of October, there was a difference in 77% of investigations. We did 77% more initiated investigations in October than we did of just 6 months ago. It's impacting our staff. Their caseloads are high, and so that's why we ask for the support. We need your support in recruiting staff as much as you can. So.
Well, it sounds like some of the, you don't call them job fairs, would you call it?
Hiring fairs.
Hiring fairs, have been very successful, and that's encouraging that there are people that want to help. And so that's encouraging. Well, thank y'all for what you do. And again, I don't mean to turn this into a data thing, but I do know that data drives behavior. And I would encourage you to just sort of figure out what are those handful of most important metrics. I know it's easy to get buried in dozens and dozens and dozens, but what are those things that are the most meaningful, that are really going to drive? And everyone throughout the organization should know what those are, right? So everybody's marching to the same drum, and it gets reviewed often. And I think that'll help unite the department and certainly help build support with your partner agencies in the legislature when you need it.
Thank you, Senator Hewitt.
All right. Thank y'all. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Senator Hewitt. Senator Fessy.
Thank you so much. I want to let y'all know how much I appreciate the two meetings we've had and the data that was brought out to my knowledge and helped me try to help y'all. I believe y'all division is very important to get things going in the right direction. And I know how, y'all big heart in this, and that's what it takes. And so I just want to be help out in different ways. And so I got a couple questions. Senator Hewitt hit on a couple of things that I was going to ask, and one of the things is when we line up a case, do we grade the cases? Like, is it an A certain level, a B, and to the worst levels?
Yes. So what we do is whenever an investigation, we assign it for investigation, there's a couple things that we look at. Depending on what information is provided, it is assigned a specific allegation. Based on that allegation, it is categorized as a level, which is different than a response priority that you've all heard many, many times about before. And that also helps drive of wait, if it's this level, I need to get at least this many collaterals and that many collaterals, depending on the severity of the allegation. So some of the allegations include substance exposed newborn. They range medical neglect. We have allegations, many allegations regarding sexual abuse, but it includes sexual intercourse, sexual enticement, oral intercourse. So it's a broad variety of allegations to narrow down. It's specifically for the worker what to look for in that specific allegation, and then also what collaterals are needed to be able to support the investigation. The other layer that we have, or the level system that you may be referencing, is the response priority. And when an investigation is assigned based on an assessment, it is assigned a response priority level 1, 2, 3, or 4. And depending on that level is the time frame that is expected for the worker to make initial contact with the victims and at least one caretaker. So for level 1, that's 24 hours. For level 2, that's 48 hours. And then level 3 is 3 days. And then level 4 is 5 days. So those are the two different criteria that we kind of use to look at the direction of a case.
Okay, so that brings me to kind of into my question. The next question is, okay, so when you're grading these levels, what layer of management and y'all teams decides what level or what grade that gets? And what I'm trying to do is get on experiences and how much knowledge each level in y'all position. I think y'all have, 5 layers of management. So I'm just trying to decide, and just get that information to see exactly who's making those decisions on and how much I guess authority they got in saying that whatever the level should be.
Okay, so when a report comes in, an intake worker level receives the information, and they make the recommendation of this is what it's recommended to be. Then a supervisor reviews that information and makes the final decision of whether a report is accepted, what the allegations are going to be included in that report, and then what the response priority is based on the assessment. Once they approve it, it then goes to the local office, and the local office also has the opportunity to review that as well.
And they can make a change in that position if they think necessary.
They can request a review of that decision if they would like to. Yes.
So where I'm kind of leading that to is back to some of the things Senator Hewitt was talking about, is getting the data. And where I'm going with this is in those different levels. And we see this I call it an epidemic of fentanyl throughout the country. So what I'm looking at is the preemptive measures that we can take that data to kind of see what can we do before it gets to the worst level and all that sort of thing. And are we kind of putting that on your dashboard to kind of, maybe we need to watch this case a little more, that we can keep it from going to the higher level. And that's just a thought that I was wondering how y'all handle that.
Actually, we do have something called high-risk criteria, and that's where your manager level comes in, where that additional expertise comes in. So based on set criteria, there are cases that are identified as high risk. And as per policy, that requires a managerial staffing if it meets that criteria. Get some extra level, get some more eyes on that case. We're more concerned. Let's get there and provide some more direction to the staff to be able to try to rectify the situation.
Okay. Well, like I said, I really, back y'all 100%. I know, we talked in the 2 meetings that we've had with myself that we need more staff and to get more help. But I just want to make sure that we start filling in the holes where they need to be filled in and making sure that we do the best we can in correcting the problem, which we see the epidemic of fentanyl. So I'm thinking, do we need to think at a different level to start changing that game? Because none of us have that experience.
Exactly.
And so what I'm trying to do is get enough of us together to understand, and maybe, getting other departments involved in our sheriff's departments and all those. Maybe we can grab some data from them on what they're seeing in this fentanyl problem, and maybe combining all that information together and try to do, where I would like to see Louisiana be the number one in the country on getting this problem solved. And so whatever I can do to help, I just wanted y'all to know I'm here.
Thank you, Senator
Okay.
Fessy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fessy. There are no more questions on the board. I do want to make some final comments and kind of end, I guess, our meeting. And Senator Fessy, was Ezekiel Harris from your area?
Yes.
So if you would like to get us a photo of him, we would love
We'll
to
be
add
glad
him as well. I'm going to start off with this statement. The most powerless citizens of our state are our children. They can't vote. They don't have no lobbyists. And all they have are their parents, oftentimes. And if they are unable to step up to the plate, then they have us. I believe that there are many people that needs to come to the table and help you guys along the way, because again, I have always said this, and not just for DCFS, this is in every area, because state government cannot fix all of our problems alone. People talk about the separation of church and state, but the Bible said that the government shall be upon his shoulders. So that means that it's not separated if it's on your shoulder. So I will continue to work with you guys and work with the department, to work with the First Lady has made a commitment. I think prior to COVID, she had started an initiative, and then COVID hit, and then everything just kind of went aside. And I spoke with her, I believe, yesterday, and she's getting ready to start some of those initiatives back. I told her some of the ideas I had as it related to bringing in the faith-based community, because if everybody just did a little bit, it's going to change the trajectory of all of us. But there are a couple of things that I do want to say in my closing, especially as it relates to the Paul case. I do know that according to the paper, let me say that, according to the article, there had been at least where the department had been contacted 3 or 4 times prior to the mother who it was stated that she was on marijuana, and I think it's something to the knowledge that she was taking it to help with nausea, something of that magnitude or whatever. But you guys have been called out like 3 times in that case. Going back to what Senator Fessy said, and maybe perhaps Senator Hewitt, that to me should have made them, put them into a certain category when somebody else called. It seemed like to me that it should have. I'm not sure. But I'm going to ask this basic question that we asked in our last committee hearing in health and welfare. Because within 4 months, less than 6 months, we've had 2 kids or 2 babies to die at the age of 2 or under from fentanyl. What safeguard measures are in place today to try to ensure that that doesn't happen again? I know nothing is an absolute, but today, because Baton Rouge had everything supposedly. I mean, when I listened to the presentation a couple weeks ago, it seemed like we had everything you could imagine supposedly in place. What is different today to ensure to the best of your ability that it doesn't happen again?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I want to just be clear that everything that we're throwing at Baton Rouge or bringing into Baton Rouge to shore up Baton Rouge is because the deficit is there so deeply. So it's not new wraparound things. It's really like, how can we make these things actually happen? And so we will be assessing to make sure that what we have put in place actually will work. But these 2 things that Mona talked about today, making sure that the AD actually has more time off on our hands and having the actual position with a person in it full time to be the case assigner that's working with the AD for that reason, We believe this is our latest solve for X. That in mind, when my,
Area director, right?
that's the person who's over that particular region,
which
Baton Rouge.
has changed, or that person's no longer there.
So
No?
the area director, we have somebody that is working in that area, coming from another region right now.
Okay.
But we have someone, we're working on hiring the full-time person there.
Gotcha.
But so we have somebody in the position right now, serving in the role. Let me say it that way. We have someone serving in the role right now, and the case assigner is the difference. The case assigner that Senator Jackson has said have one everywhere, is because that's where we're hanging our hat. The case assigner that she said, and then who's going to be talking to all the case assigners, right? So this is the latest expression of we must do this differently, but Casey also is going to work with us to take a look at this and make sure, is this enough? Do we need more? Are there other things that we can bring to bear that have shown evidence of solving for X on this issue? So we won't be able to come back to you again and say the case got dropped by somebody. We would know. I've said to the staff, this is what I want to know. This is my piece of data that I want to know every day. Did every child that was supposed to be seen today get seen? And if somehow we ran out of space and time ourselves because one worker got hung up removing children, and the rest of the two that she had on her caseload today didn't work, then can we at least ask law enforcement to do a well check of that household until we can get to it? They've not said yes to me yet because it sounds real simple and it's not. But this is what we're solving for right now. That's what I want to know. This is what I call Dickie about, right? I want to be able to make it easier for the caseworker who's out in the field to quickly put the information in the phone if need be and say, I saw this child, the child is safe, or I didn't get to my last two cases, whatever is the thing that we're going to use. This is what I'm looking at right now. This is what I'm looking for to be different, to be able to say, okay, I want to come back and tell you, this is what we know about every day. We know that every child that had a 24-hour got seen within 24 hours, or they didn't get seen by us. And so we asked law enforcement to go out. And so Mona and Evelyn going out, Renda, throughout these last few months, so many conversations with law enforcement, coupling our efforts to understand how much we're both needed. One may have more capacity today than the other one. Let's do it together. Many other conversations with partners, but today, I cannot tell you that tonight I will know that every child got seen. I will tell you that they're using mornings, right? Morning huddles to make sure that everybody got seen yesterday, right? I kind of want to know at the end of that day, not the beginning of the next day. So that I think will help us. We will bring you along the journey with us. The Senate Health and Welfare meeting, I believe, is on December 7th. So we will be having some other updates between now and then as to the other meetings that we have with Casey, as well as what the outcome is with our work with OTS. Madam Chair, I'm 1,000% committed to DCFS. This is my third time working at DCFS, and my very first job, professional job, working at was at DCFS. The people that we serve, the families that are hurting, that are reaching for the drugs, or that are hurting the children in other ways, those who choose to serve as an employee, they're incredible and tired, and we have some ways to re-energize them, and that's what we want to do. We want to show them support. We want to let them see them open up their wings and be able to serve people. One of the things that the staff kept saying is, what will retain employees is having enough services and resources for the clients. So it all ties together, because nobody wants to do a job everybody wants to have a career that they feel like they can do very well. And so those things really tie together. As long as I'm in this seat, I will lead from our values. And I will be seeking to continue improvements in our safety assessments and our responsiveness. And we'll do that with a bent toward a human-centered design where people will know if you make a call in, what happens next, we'll be able to answer that question. It'll already be answered for them. We're looking to have data-driven services, decisions made by data, and our services by data. I understand the severity and importance of the issues before us. I'm committed to improvement, and I'm committed to supporting the good work that we're doing every day.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And one of the things that I hear that seems that's going to be substantially different is actually the case. What is it called? Case assignment. Case assigner.
The case assigner.
Case assigner. I do want to go to your sheet here right quick.
Yep.
And when we meet again, or maybe with health and welfare, as it relates to the substance abuse exposed newborns, just in Baton Rouge alone, I see you have 51 cases. So these are children in the hospital. And I want to see what's happening in that arena, because at least here in Baton Rouge, we're supposed to have the GRACE program. I'm not asking you to really be able to to answer that, but I'm wondering when this happened in the hospital, is law enforcement coming in? Do you know? Do you guys know, or are they automatically going to the GRACE program? What's happening there?
I'm going to ask Mona to answer.
No. So, no, law enforcement typically is not involved when the newborn is exposed to substances. There are times when DCFS, because the report is accepted based on the newborn's urine or meconium testing positive, there are many times that the child is released from the hospital before we ever get involved as well. And so there are many programs, such as Grace House, that we try to utilize, but it is all based on, I go back to, an assessment of this family's needs. How are the substances affecting their parenting? What kind of support do they need to stay healthy, to stay safe, and provide for that newborn?
Who does the assessment? Is that from you guys or through the program?
No, DCFS conducts the assessment as part of their investigation. And then we also have a partnership with the Capital Area Human Services District in Baton Rouge, where we have a substance abuse counselor that comes into our office and conducts substance abuse assessments and makes recommendations for treatment. So that's also available in the Baton Rouge area. And then we also refer the newborns to early steps. One of the things that we have recently started doing is we've contracted with nurses. So the nurses are doing an additional assessment of our substance-exposed newborns, which includes like a medical overview of this child and providing resources and providing education to that parent. So that is something that we've added. And actually, I'm supposed to have a meeting at 3:00 this afternoon to review that, to say, how is that going? How can we expand that? And then we are also participating in what's called a policy academy with one of our national resource centers. Louisiana was one of the states that was chosen to participate in this policy academy that is just related to the needs of substance-exposed newborns. So what we hope to do is bring what we've already done with the nurses to this policy academy to say, hey, can you help us with this? Is this in line with best practice? What do you recommend? And we're partners on that policy academy with the LDH, Office of Public Health, and there are some other stakeholders that are participating in that. So.
I was going to ask you about the hospitals. Are they participating in that at all?
I don't think there is a specific hospital. They've been part of some other work groups that we've been on this topic, but I don't think they're part of the policy academy.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate the work of the Casey Foundation coming in, assisting us with this. And certainly I know that they have a lot of great best practices, I'm sure, and models that we can actually grow from. But this is going to be my commitment, and I'll be looking at this. And so I will be working very closely with you guys, because let me tell you, and you know this already, Mrs. Ricks, Madam Secretary, when things hit home, your perspective really change. And there's been so much I've learned in the last week that is too much to digest. We have to make the system simpler, so when a person does call in, or if they have an issue, they know how to do that. That's oftentimes why people probably don't get involved. We definitely gonna need more partners as we're moving along through the process. But I'm gonna look at criminal penalties for negligence when there is noted negligence. Should there be a criminal penalty? I'm gonna look at perhaps, does the department needs to be collapsed? Because I'm gonna tell you, I absolutely do not believe that the workers who are our case workers who are going out when there's a natural disaster should still be tasked with doing their job while they're trying to handle a disaster. I think that is way too much. And then I'm going to look at, again, how do we work with partners, external partners? That's going to be my commitment. And so I'm being very upfront. No one has to be caught off guard. This is something that's going to be at the premier of my list of things going forward. Because, again, our children, they do not ask to come into the world. They can't choose their parents. They can't choose their families. But when they have failed them, then we are the next in line to ensure that they at least have a good beginning. And as we listen to OJJ, because this always makes me a little sensitive, you know, we talk about the cycle. Mm-hmm. It's all a part of it. Hurting kids become hurting adults that hurt other folks and more people and more kids. It just becomes a cycle. And we have to figure out, we can't do it all, but we have to figure out a way of how we can make a dent in this. And so I appreciate you. Thank you so very much. There are no other comments, no other questions. You do have your hands full, Madam Secretary, and I would hope that as you go forward and as you are giving the instructions to your team, because, again, everything rises and falls on leadership, I hope that they adhere to it. And when they don't, I hope that you have the flexibility and the liberty to be able to make the decisions to be able to remedy that. Because in some case, and I'm still not satisfied with where we are in Baton Rouge, not just yet. I have to see more. But at least I hope that you're able to do that. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I'm done. No additional questions? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
So be it.